Chapter 240. Everyone knew that the affiliated schools had no shortage of geniuses. AF1 and AF2 had already gathered geniuses from all walks of life in the empire. Perhaps the teachers were already numb to it. After all, there were too many geniuses here, and it was tiring to judge them. The shooting test field was circular, and within the circular area were 8 small fields. Each field occupied a 45-degree fan-shaped area. Outside the shooting field, there was a ring of stands. The stands were divided into 2 levels. The upper level was where the teachers in charge of the test moved around, while the lower level was where the students who came to take the test could move around. Those who had already completed the test or were waiting to take the test could all watch the people who were taking the test in the shooting field below. Shooting was a compulsory course for every student. Even if you had never touched a gun before, you would still have to take shooting lessons after you were officially admitted. Therefore, shooting was considered a key course in the school, and many teachers liked to use it to test the students. Regardless of whether it was the course assessment or the selection test, shooting accounted for a higher percentage of the students. Because of this, a lot of people chose to shoot. Perhaps in the outside world, curve shooting would be an extremely difficult technique, but here, when geniuses collided with geniuses, it was no longer a problem. If you shot 100% of the time, the teachers might take a second look at you. Some of the previous batches of AF1 and AF2 students were also watching from the sidelines. From their expressions, Silen could tell that not many of the people who came to take the exam were worthy of their attention. Of course, it was not that the people taking the test were too weak. If they had been admitted and trained by the affiliated schools, they would have shone even brighter. As the teachers watched indifferently, and as the students from previous batches chatted and laughed, the candidates entered and left one after another. Before coming here, they were full of ambition, but after experiencing it for themselves, they finally understood why AF1 and AF2 could become the top schools in the empire. Gold would always shine, but when there was a lot of gold together, your gold would not stand out. However, in Silen's opinion, the shooting test tested the shooting skills of the candidates, and the other was to observe the type of gun each candidate was used with. Yes, the guns used in the shooting test were chosen by the candidates themselves, and the settings allowed them to use their own guns. This was why guns were not prohibited when coming to AF1's preparatory campus. It also showed that the people of AF1 had the ability to control any possible situation. Silen looked up at the sky and watched the people shooting below. Libero and Ironhead did not choose to shoot, but Wally and Taita did. Wally was in front of Silen, and Taita was behind Silen. They were arranged according to the order of registration. Wally and Silen were assigned to the same sector. Wally's gun sense was very good, and when Silen watched Wally shoot, he thought of Tang Qiuqiu. This kind of gun sense was either innate, or it was the influence of his living environment. If it was the latter, then Wally lived in a messy place, but it wasn't easy to nurture a carefree person like Wally in such a messy place. Wally directly chose a gun from the gun rack in the shooting range. After looking at it, he fired 1 round before starting. Then, he hit all the targets, and it was a series of shots. Standing here, Silen couldn't see Wally's eyes when he shot. He could only see his shooting technique and the result. Maybe some of the instructors could see it through the cameras inside the shooting range. Silen could not see the look in Wally's eyes when he was shooting. He could only see the shooting method and the result. Perhaps some of the teachers could see it through the cameras in the shooting field. Silen, it's almost your turn, right? Taita ran over. He had just gone to chat with a student from the previous batch. Taita did not feel any pressure when it came to designing the test. Yes, there are 2 more people, Celine pointed at the fan-shaped area in front of them and said. Taita waved his hand. Don't be nervous, calm down. This was what his father often told him. Silen smiled. I'm not nervous. As they spoke, Wally came back from his stroll. There's nothing much to see. It's rare for the people from the previous batches to be looking at the pretty girls. The girls are looking at the pretty boys, and the teachers are yawning. I don't know if they're trying to piss us off. Wally leaned on the fence like he had no bones. I'm so hungry. Do you guys have anything to eat? Scylla tossed a hardtack, a bag of jerky, and a bottle of water to Wally. Conserve your energy. I think the next round will be quite tight. This test is so troublesome. Wally took the food and started to replenish his energy. Wally didn't have a subspace container, and those were luxuries for him. That was why he couldn't carry a lot of food like Scylla and Taita, and he didn't want to eat nutrient pills either. They were fine for normal times, but they couldn't satisfy his energy requirements at all during a test like this. Oh, I asked around. Apparently, there are some changes to the third round, Taita said. What changes? Scylla and Wally looked at Taita at the same time. Taita sighed. I heard that from now on, the third round will be a 3+1 test. There will be 3 optional tests, plus another test. However, this extra test might be different every batch. I think we're going to test long-distance running this time. Long-distance running? How long is it? Scylla asked. Taita shook his head. I don't know. They don't know either. We'll have to ask the teachers in charge. Wally looked up at the sky while eating the jerky. His face was bright and sad. I have a bad feeling. Scylla's number tag vibrated. It was a test reminder. I'm going now. You guys talk. After saying this, Scylla walked toward the fan-shaped area of the shooting range. He took out the box Guan Feng had given him. Subspace was not allowed inside the shooting range. Since Guan Feng had given this to Scylla, it meant that he wanted Scylla to use it boldly. There was no need to hide it. After the first examinee came out, Scylla inserted the number tag he had received earlier into the slot. The door opened, and Scylla walked in with the box. What's that box? Wally asked Taita while eating a compressed biscuit. A gun, I think. Taita wasn't sure himself. Very few people carried a gun in a box. There were about 50 or so light markers flashing in the target area. Each light marker was only the size of a fingernail, and their speed and direction were unpredictable. Scylla stood still in the shooting range. He opened the box on a nearby table and began assembling it. His speed wasn't any slower than Guanfeng's. The instructor who was looking at his area abruptly rose to his feet. Feeling uncertain, he pulled up the monitor and took a closer look. He couldn't help but curse, "Fuck. There's no way that old fox Guan would do that. There's no way he would." Another instructor saw the man's reaction and swayed over with a teacup. What's wrong? Is your sciatic nerve convulsing? Convulse my ass. I asked old fox Guan for it so many times, but he wouldn't give it to me. He just had to give it to a little kid. The instructor almost dropped his cup when he saw the image on the monitor. I can't believe he gave it away so quickly. The other instructors were curious about the duo's reaction as well. They all wore different expressions after learning the reason. But it had to be said that the box had attracted all of the instructors' attention. Why does Scylla's gun look so strange? Wally mumbled while stuffing his mouth. A purgatory thunder snake. That's a purgatory thunder snake. The pattern on the lid is the symbol of a purgatory thunder snake, and it's a K-type gun. It's a K-type. Taita yelled excitedly as he stared at Scylla's situation without blinking. Taita had only seen the B-type and E-type purgatory thunder snakes. He had never seen a K-type before. His father said that there were no more than 5 people in the entire empire who used a K-type gun. AF1 had always wanted to train people to use a K-type gun, but very few of them passed. According to his father, the old fox Guan was very difficult to deal with. Even those who thought they could use a K-type gun were rejected by the old fox Guan. Taita's yell attracted a lot of attention. Some of the people who were talking also looked over. Even those who didn't know about the purgatory thunder snake saw Taita's reaction. Combined with the gazes of the instructors on the second floor, they also began to pay attention to Scylla's situation. The reactions of this year's candidates were obviously not as big as those of the previous years. When they found out that Sillin was using a Purgatory Thunder Snake K-type gun, they all looked like they had seen a ghost. Then they all stared at Sillin's shooting range. After Sillin finished assembling the gun, the system would give a 10-second explanation, telling the candidates how much time they had to shoot and other nonsense. However, the purpose of this nonsense was actually to let the candidates adjust themselves to their best state within these 10 seconds. That was because the moment the candidates entered the shooting range, the candidates' various physiological parameters had already begun to be tested. Their heart rate, pulse, blood pressure, and other data had begun to be traced. This was also a good way to test each candidate's mental strength. When the 10 seconds were up, the system announced the start of the shooting range. Sillin raised his gun and fired without any hesitation. Missed. Before Wally could finish his sentence, he heard the system on Sillin's side report 5 times in a row. Target hit. And then, there was no then. Sillin put the gun away, dismantled and reassembled it, and left. The shooting range was silent. Only the sounds of the other fan-shaped systems could be heard. Combined with that, the entire place was in an uproar. The biscuit crumbs in Wally's mouth sprayed out. He almost choked to death and only recovered after gulping down a few mouthfuls of water. 5 shots. Wally stretched out his palm towards Taita and spread his fingers, as if to confirm the number. Yes. 5 shots. Taita's eyes lit up. This was the K-gun. The highest level of the Purgatory Thunder Snake, the K-gun. His father had always hoped to poach someone who used a K-gun, but the old fox at the gate never let them go. Taita had often heard his father complain, but after seeing Sillin's shooting today, Taita finally understood why his father had always been so insistent on poaching someone who used a K-gun. Although his abilities were limited and he couldn't really understand it, 5 shots and 50 hits was enough. The instructor in charge of Sillin's fan-shaped area looked at the physiological parameters of the shooter drawn by the system. After a while, he sighed. Another one. Another person who shot like he was eating, with no fluctuations in his parameters. Before Sillin, Wally had also been like this. Sillin. Sillin. Taita walked over and looked at Sillin eagerly. Can I touch K? K was Taita's nickname for the Purgatory Thunder Snake K-gun. He always called it that in private. It depends on your performance. If you do well in the test later, I'll agree. It's a deal. It's a deal. Okay. Just you wait. With that, Taita ran towards the shooting range. It was almost his turn, but he wasn't in the fan-shaped area. He was on the other side. Wally looked at Sillin with a strange expression. Hey, what snake is that? How did you shoot it? I want to see it too. I'll show you when we get back. Hee hee, thanks. Wally chewed on his biscuit and continued watching the test, but his mind was already wandering. Taita wasn't old, but his marksmanship wasn't bad. He didn't have any fancy techniques, curve shots, or multiple shots, but every shot hit the center of the light, and he was very decisive. After the test, Taita ran back impatiently. How was it? Not bad, right? Not bad. I'll show you when we get back after the test. Now, hurry up and rest. The shooting is almost over, and the additional test is about to be revealed, Sillin said. Just as Sillin said, after the shooting was over, the other tests were also over. The students were sent to a gathering point. At the gathering point, Sillin's group met up with Libero and Ironhead. Looking at their expressions, it was obvious that they'd done well. But while the 3 tests were not bad, the following additional test made everyone speechless. The additional test was a long-distance run. Many people had heard about this, but they only knew the specifics now. What was the specifics? Run around the ball. What did running around the ball mean? Look, everyone was standing on the equator. This was also the name of a track that AF1 had specially built. The equator wasn't as flat and narrow as the other tracks. It was wide and full of obstacles. Trees, stone piles, slopes, and so on. Even though Planet Hiko wasn't big, running around the ball was enough for everyone. Apart from the geographical obstacles, everyone looked at the black guy running over and suddenly felt as if autumn frost had swept past them. Is that a monkey? No, that's a chimpanzee, a giant chimpanzee. It's really huge. As the chimpanzee ran closer and closer, the tremors on the ground grew stronger. My stomach is starting to tremble, Wally said. That's a kidney you're touching. I'm shaking all over. No one taught me how to fight against this species in my entire life. Wally pointed at the big guy that was about 10 meters tall. There's more. Sillin pointed at some animals that were running over from the other side. In other words, not only did they have to run around the ball, but they also couldn't run slowly and defenselessly. There would be these big guys chasing after them. I hate 3+1. Wally looked up at the sky and sighed. Celine looked left and right, and suddenly realized that the cat had run off somewhere to contact its feelings. Chapter 241. The additional test didn't have a time limit, and they couldn't use flying tools. Of course, it was a different story if they were like Zani who could fly. There weren't too many rules to avoid them. They could form groups or teams. Therefore, the 5 people in Celine's dormitory moved together. From the start, Celine noticed that Taita's expression was a little strange. Compared to Libero and Ironhead, who were full of distress, Taita looked more like he was happy to see an old friend. He just tried his best to maintain a serious expression. Although Taita wasn't big, his stamina was quite good. At least he didn't fall behind. In order to avoid the animals behind them, there would probably be some animals that would cause trouble on the road ahead. Celine and the others saw an unlucky guy being thrown backwards by a black gorilla by the leg. The tigers, leopards, bulls and snakes wouldn't be too bad either. After running for a while, Celine's group of 5 rested behind a pile of rocks. They would continue after an hour. Taita, I didn't know you had such good stamina, Libero said. Of course. I've been training with my dad's subordinates since I was young. Taita was quite proud of this. Celine looked at the sky. Their pace couldn't keep up with the speed of the planet's rotation. They couldn't experience day all the time. However, they didn't know what would happen when night fell. They couldn't reason with the animals. If they didn't grasp the situation, they would probably be in trouble, just like that poor guy who had been sent flying by the black gorilla. If Celine was alone, it would definitely be much faster. With Celine's ability to hide, it would be much better than the 5 of them moving together. However, this was just an additional test. There was no need to fight for first place. They could move together and help those guys. They could also learn some other information along the way. At first, Celine was thinking of sending the gray cat to make friends with the animals, but who would have thought that the gray cat would disappear without a trace before the preliminaries even began? It only left behind the words, "I'm going to make friends," before disappearing completely. It's dark. Wally said as he leaned against the pile of rocks and watched the darkening sky. His tone was a little embarrassed. He didn't seem like his usual carefree self. Are you afraid of the dark? Taita asked. I'm not afraid. I'm just worried. Don't worry, we're here. If you want to sleep, then go ahead. Use this time to take a nap. We'll continue our journey later. Libero moved to the outside and had Wally stay in the middle. You guys stay here first, I'll check out the terrain. They didn't know anything about this special runway, and they weren't allowed to bring any detectors. There were signal shielding devices and magnetic field disruptors around it. Those with a poor sense of direction would probably go the wrong way. Celine quietly checked the surroundings of the pile of rocks, then climbed up a pile of rocks and hid himself in the shadows to observe the situation around the pile of rocks. Looking at the placement of the stones from above, Celine gradually figured out some principles. The locations of these piles of rocks would affect people's thinking and confuse them into making the wrong choice. He felt that there was something fishy about this place. In this short amount of time, Scylla discovered that the positions of the piles of rocks had changed. When they entered the area of the pile of rocks, they had marked the route, but if they continued to follow these markings, they would definitely go the wrong way. After going the wrong way, they would return, and then go the wrong way again. In the end, they would be trapped here until dawn, but no one knew what would happen during the long night. It was better to leave this place early and find another resting spot. While Scylla was looking at the arrangement of the pile of rocks, a figure quietly snuck into the area of the pile of rocks. After a short pause, the figure floated over to Scylla and approached from behind Scylla. On the other side, Wally, who had been resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes and looked in Scylla's direction. But before he could say anything, there was a thud, as if something heavy had fallen to the ground. Wally quickly got up and ran in that direction, with Libero and the other two following closely behind. But when the four of them arrived at the pile of rocks where Scylla was, they discovered that Scylla was standing on top of the pile of rocks, safe and sound, and there was a person lying on the ground that they did not recognize. This was definitely not a candidate who had participated in the test. Scylla had an impression of all the candidates who had participated in the test, but Scylla was sure that he had never seen this person before. In other words, this person was a student from the previous batch. In the long-distance race of the additional test, other than the animals causing trouble for the candidates, there were also students from the previous batches watching. They were there to ferret out the candidates who did not follow the rules and used illegal tools. At the same time, like the animals, they would occasionally create some obstacles for the candidates. Wally walked over and pulled on the person, saying, "He fainted. He tried to sneak up on me, so I knocked him out." Scylla got down from the pile of rocks and looked around. "Let's hurry up and leave. There's something strange about this pile of rocks. The longer we delay, the more it will affect our judgment." The few of them nodded, but before they could take a step, they felt the ground shake. "It's that chimpanzee. Hurry up and leave," Libero said. "No, we can't leave for now." Scylla pointed in the direction in front of them. "There are people coming from that direction." The few of them quickly left and hid, erasing all traces of what had happened. However, the person who had been knocked out by Scylla was left there. 3 people flew over from the sky. One was a mutant with wings, while the other 2 were normal humans. However, they were wearing flight suits and had miniature propellers on their feet. The 3 of them headed straight for where the person who had been knocked out was lying. When the 3 of them saw the person on the ground, they checked his condition and injected him with a medicine. The person quickly woke up. Seeing that his companion had finally woken up, one of them laughed gloatingly. "Careless, huh? Let me tell you, be careful. Even if they haven't received training from the affiliated schools, there are still many powerful people." The person who had woken up sat up and rubbed his neck. He cursed. "Fuck, that kid moved too fast. I miscalculated. They should still be in this pile of rocks. It won't be easy to find them in there. The instruments are all jammed, and we can't detect them. We'll have to find them ourselves. No, we just need to trap them here. An hour is enough. By then, the children will probably be confused by the rocks." The few of them jumped onto the pile of rocks and stood on top of it, chatting while paying attention to their surroundings. As they were talking, the chimpanzee was getting closer. "Hey, King Kong, I heard you threw a poor kid away. Did you break his leg or his arm?" one of them joked. The chimpanzee bared his teeth and walked over, pounding his chest and roaring. He raised his chin and ignored the 4 of them, continuing to walk forward. "Hey, this guy is getting more and more arrogant." But then again, King Kong doesn't seem to have lost his way here. There's a phrase in this world called the intuition of a beast. The quartet on top of the pile of rocks were conversing in a relaxed manner, but Libero and the others who were hiding in the shadows were feeling bitter inside. Scylla observed for a moment and discovered that the chimpanzee was walking past them, but the quartet was still around, and it wasn't a good idea to switch places right now. They would be discovered if they weren't careful. Libero and Ironhead both had bitter expressions. Wally's eyes were lowered, and it was hard to tell what he was feeling. However, he was on high alert. Scylla glanced at Taita, and the little guy was grinning at the chimpanzee. Seeing Scylla looking at him, Taita raised his head and made a shove gesture at Scylla, then continued to look in King Kong's direction. The chimpanzee was getting closer and closer. Libero's palms were sweating. If they were exposed, they wouldn't just have to face this black guy, but also the 4 past students. He really wanted to remind Taita not to look in that direction, but before he could touch Taita, he was so shocked by Taita's action that his hair almost stood on end. Taita looked around and made sure that the 4 past students couldn't see him from this angle. Then, when the chimpanzee walked over, he stuck his head out and put a finger in front of his mouth. Shoo! Scylla and the others, Libero, Ironhead, and Wally stiffened. Then, their muscles tightened, and they were ready to rush out at any time. The next moment, they saw Scylla and Taita both jump toward the chimpanzee. The 4 of them who were chatting on top of a pile of rocks looked in the direction of the chimpanzee, frowned, and thought for a moment. Then, he shook his head and continued the conversation with his companions. The chimpanzee walked further and further away until it left the area of rocks. "Hey, is this considered going through the back door?" Libero asked in a low voice. Now, all 5 of them were lying on the chimpanzee's belly, and the chimpanzee's back was facing the 4 of them. Perhaps the 4 of them didn't expect this to happen. Yeah. Wally looked at the tuft of fur in his hand. It was really tough. He really wished he could take a tuft of it back as a souvenir. The chimpanzee only stopped when it could no longer see the area of rocks. "Thank you, King Kong." Taita landed on the ground and patted the chimpanzee's arm. "Hee, you're welcome." A crisp baby voice rang out. "Let me introduce you guys. This is King Kong. We've known each other since we were young. Every year, he comes to my house to play," Taita introduced. Now, Libero and the others finally understood why Taita wasn't worried at all, and Scylla didn't react at all. It turned out that he was Taita's old friend. It wasn't surprising that many beasts in the affiliated schools knew how to talk. But, why did he have a baby voice? "Taita, he's still a child." "No, is he still in his infancy?" Wally looked at the big guy curiously. "Yes, King Kong is still a child." Taita nodded. Scylla and the others were silent. Was the difference between species really that big? "I'll send you guys off here. I'm going to take another route." "It's not in your track area," King Kong said. "Okay, go play." Taita waved his hand. "I'll find you after the test." "Wait, King Kong, right? I want to ask, have you seen a huimao?" "A huimao this big?" Scylla gestured and asked King Kong. King Kong scratched its head with its thick black fingers. "If you're talking about that cat called Snore, then I've seen it." "Yes, that's it." "Do you know where it is now?" Scylla asked again. King Kong shook its head. "I saw it half an hour ago." It made Doll cry, so it left a deep impression on everyone. "Ah. Doll is?" "A small crocodile the same size as me." A big crocodile was considered a small crocodile. If big meant about the same length, then it really wasn't small. It was a different story if it was based on age. Libero and the others were in disbelief when they heard this, including Taita. He couldn't imagine that the cat who had slept on the carpet with him not long ago could make a crocodile cry. Since it was King Kong's friend, then the crocodile was definitely not small. However, Scylla wasn't surprised. He sighed. That guy went to bully someone else again. After separating from King Kong, Scylla and the others continued on their way. They encountered a few groups of people along the way, and many were injured. Their injuries weren't serious, but it seemed that they were mainly psychological blows. They wondered how the people at the front were doing. If there wasn't enough food here, they had to find a solution. The fruits in the forest had all been taken by the people at the front, and the animals they encountered along the way weren't something they could kill. They could only find plants to fill their stomachs. In comparison, Scylla and the others were considered lucky. After all, the use of subspace wasn't forbidden here. They ran and stopped occasionally, and they had to find shelter to avoid bumping into the previous students. On the evening of the second day, Scylla finally met Huimao. Judging from the guy's expression, he seemed to be quite good at making friends. Scylla, let me introduce a new friend to you. He's right in front. Huimao raised his paw and pointed ahead. The area in front was surrounded by swamps and dense forests. Under the gradually darkening night, it looked even more strange. No one knew what was inside the forest or under the swamp. At the very least, Scylla's intuition told him that there was danger there. Not long ago, they heard a short and urgent scream from this side. After that, there was no movement after that, and by the time they arrived, there was already no one in sight. Because they knew that this area was full of hidden dangers, Scylla and the others decided to wait for a while and pass through after night. It would be slightly safer that way. You mean this area? Scylla raised his hand and gestured at the swamps and dense forests not far away. Yes, I have a friend there. He's quite a nice guy. Huimao squatted on Scylla's shoulder and wagged his tail. I even fought for him. Now? Of course. Aren't you guys in a hurry? This is his territory. This way, he can help you guys. Huimao was very proud. This was all thanks to him. Scylla called the other four and followed Huimao. Scylla, are we really going to go there at this time? Taita looked around and felt that the surroundings were spooky. There seemed to be a pair of big, cold eyes looking at them in the darkness. It's okay. Trust Wheeze. Yeah, trust me. That friend has a good temper. I'm not lying. You'll know when you see him. Huimao led the way in front, jumping around on the branches. It was late at night. Scylla and the others finally saw the good-tempered friend that Huimao mentioned. The area near the pond was filled with tall plants, and there, a big fellow was entrenched there. The scales covering its thick body reflected the starlight with a cold metallic light, and with the help of the cold light, they could see the dotted stripes and diamond-shaped patterns scattered all over its body. From time to time, they could see the sharpness of its forked tongue, and the long and thin pupils in its cold eyes stared straight at Scylla and the others. A creepy feeling that was colder than the night hit them. Chapter 242. Libero and the others stood there, looking at the giant snake that could easily swallow the four of them. If it weren't for Scylla saying that he believed in the cat, they would have long since fled. However, even if they took action now, the chances of success weren't high. They definitely wouldn't be able to defeat such a giant snake. At the very least, it was impossible for all five of them to retreat. Was this the good-tempered friend that the cat had mentioned? After seeing the snake's eyes, Wally wouldn't believe that this fellow had a good temper even if he was beaten to death. Snakes didn't have eyelids, so they couldn't blink. Thus, the current situation was that this giant snake was staring at them with eyes that seemed cold and cruel. It was as if a bucket of ice had been splashed on their faces, sending chills down their spines. Although this giant snake's eyes were cold, Scylla could see that its attitude towards Huimao wasn't bad. Its eyes weren't as cold as when it looked at them. The gray cat wagged its tail and ran over happily. It jumped onto the snake's thick body and stood on its slightly raised head. Then, it patted the snake's head with its paw and said, "Look, this is Bonner the giant snake, my new friend." "It's Senta," Bona added. Its voice sounded a little hoarse. It was natural, and every line of its voice had a natural sense of coldness. It was not like King Kong's childlike voice. However, if one were to ignore this point, based on this sentence alone, the giant snake really wanted to express friendliness. It's the same meaning. After Huimao finished introducing Bona, he continued to introduce Scylla and the others. "Hello." Scylla stepped forward to greet him. The closer he got to Bona, the colder he felt. Because of Hui Mao, the giant snake had agreed to bring them out of the swamp. After all, it would take a lot of effort for them to safely leave the swamp. Moreover, there were many other traps in the swamp and jungle. Only an idiot wouldn't take advantage of such an opportunity. Thus, under the faint starlight, a snake with 5 people and a cat on its back left the swamp and jungle. The snake's body was very cold, and its scales felt a little metallic to the touch. Wally couldn't help but touch it a few times, but after being whipped by the snake's tail, he became much more obedient. "I've never been so close to such a big fellow before," Libero said with a sigh. "Me too." There was excitement in Taida's eyes. He had sat on King Kong's shoulder before, but King Kong was King Kong, and Serpent was Serpent. One belonged to the class of mammals, and the other belonged to the class of reptiles. They were different species, and the feeling they gave off was also very different. When Silen's group swaggered through the swamp area on the back of the giant snake under the night sky, some other people hiding in the swamp area also noticed this unique combination. Originally, they were afraid of the big snake in this swamp forest area, so they had been very careful. When they found that the big snake was quickly coming towards them, some people sped up their pace and fled forward. As long as they got out of the swamp forest area, they would be fine. Some people felt that they might not be able to escape the big snake's pursuit, so they simply found a satisfactory place to hide in the surroundings. However, they found that the giant snake did not seem to see them. It did not chase after the people in front of it and continued to crawl at its original speed. When some of the people hiding in the surroundings saw that there was a person on the snake, their jaws almost dropped to the ground. After Bonner crawled through a dense forest area, another pair of eyes opened in a shrub with large leaves. If one looked carefully, they would see that there was actually a person hiding in the shrub. However, this person was like a chameleon. His skin had changed to the same color and pattern as the surroundings. Even his body temperature was similar to the surroundings. This way, even heat-sensitive animals would not be able to detect him. The person looked in the direction where the big snake was crawling and cursed, "Fuck, they're cheating. The competition didn't say that we weren't allowed to get close. Who asked us to not know that snake?" said the other people hiding behind the shrub. Bonner was crawling forward with Silen and the others when he suddenly stopped and looked back as if he was trying to confirm something. He then suddenly sped up. Ironhead almost fell off the snake. He only managed to grab onto the snake's scales and asked Silen and the others, "What's wrong?" "Someone's coming," replied Silen. Hui Mao jumped onto the snake's head and patted Bonner. "What's going on?" "A troublesome person is chasing after us." "Damn it, why is she in a place like this?" Bonner ran as fast as he could, as if he was running away from a disaster. Hui Mao could sense that the person chasing after them was a human, but the fact that Bonner was behaving in such a manner made him curious. The snake was fast, but the person chasing after it wasn't slow either. 5 minutes later, a voice came from behind. "Bonner, you bastard, stop right there." Although it was a woman's voice, it was too loud. It was so loud that the insects that had fallen asleep in this swamp area were startled awake, and they began to squeak. "Is she using a megaphone?" Wally had a look of disbelief on his face. "Kenancy never uses that kind of thing. Her voice can make a megaphone explode." Bonner continued to run without looking back. Thus, in the swamp area, under the starlight of the night, a large snake was running as fast as it could, while a girl was chasing after it. From time to time, she would say a few words, but she didn't shout anymore. She was probably trying to conserve her strength, but it seemed that she wouldn't stop until she caught up to Bonner. Because of the girl's relentless pursuit, Bonner's speed was also quite fast. By dawn, he had already reached the edge of the swamp area. That girl is still chasing after him. Isn't her stamina a little too good? Libero sighed. If they were in each other's shoes, Libero believed that he wouldn't be able to maintain such a high speed for more than an hour, but that girl had been chasing after him for more than 4 hours. And she hadn't been shaken off by Bonner. She's quite aggressive. Wally looked at the snake that was trying its best to escape. He wondered how the snake had offended the girl. Sigh, women really can't be offended. After finally running out of the swamp area, Hui Mao jumped down with Sillin and the others. Bonner, hurry up and run. Bonner didn't pay much attention to Sillin and the others. He changed directions and continued running. Sillin and the others hadn't gone far when they heard a loud bang behind them. Looking back, he saw the huge snake rolling on the ground a few times after being beaten. In front of the snake stood a girl with two small braids hanging down from her temples and a ponytail at the back. She looked like she had just come out of the training ground. Sillin felt that the girl looked familiar, but it was his first time seeing her. Why are you running? Kenancy stared at Bonner and panted. I'm not running, I'm just crawling a little faster. Bonner insisted. You're still trying to argue? Bang! Another punch. Hui Mao's tail shook as he scratched his head with his claws. He then looked at Bonner, who was rolling on the ground a few more times. It must hurt. Kenancy, I'm telling you, snakes have a temper. Bonner roared. Temper? You still dare to throw a temper? Kenancy raised her voice. Seeing that the situation wasn't looking good, Hui Mao jumped onto Sillin's shoulder and shouted at Bonner, Brother, we'll be leaving first. Take care. If you want to run, then run. Why did you have to shout like that? Aren't you just angry at a snake? Can't you attract the enemy's firepower or something? Bonner was so angry that he slapped the ground with his tail. Huelu, screw your ancestors. You ungrateful bastard. Meow, I don't have any ancestors. Hui Mao was telling the truth. It indeed didn't have any ancestors. It was a rare species in the universe, a naturally formed cyborg. Sillin was speechless. Calling this cat brother really wasn't a good idea. Sillin didn't know what happened to that pitiful big fellow. He only knew that they could still vaguely hear the commotion from afar. After passing through the swamps and forests, Sillin's group passed through deserts and grasslands. They encountered a lot of strange creatures, and they caused quite a lot of trouble for the examinees who passed. In comparison, the previous term students caused much less trouble, and most of them just watched the show from the sidelines and chuckled. Therefore, they still had to pay attention to the local overlords. When they were about to leave the desert, Sillin and the others saw a mutated armadillo lizard roll down the sandstone with its tail in its mouth. As it rolled, it mumbled, Run, run. It didn't take long before a giant scorpion rushed out of the sandstone and crawled towards them. Sillin and the others ran madly again. The gray cat originally wanted to give it a go, but Sillin grabbed it by the back of its neck and dragged it along with him. It was better not to cause trouble now. Honestly speaking, this additional long-distance running had proven its usefulness to a certain group of people. For example, Wally was extremely resistant to drought. Even Libero and Ironhead, who were half-mutants, were much stronger than Taita. When Taita was traversing the desert, Sillin and the others had to take turns to carry him on their backs most of the way. Some of the examinees Sillin saw were in no better condition than them. Some of them were even dressed in rags and looked incredibly miserable. After all, not everyone had the privilege of being escorted by local tyrants like Vajra and Bonner. When they finally finished one lap around the planet, everyone had the same thought. 1. We're finally done. 2. Thank God this planet isn't as big as the one AF1 was on. Some of the people who had been eliminated after this additional long-distance run had left of their own accord. After all, until now, the teachers of AF1 hadn't eliminated anyone on a large scale. Even for those who had fallen behind, the teachers of AF1 didn't eliminate them. 40% of the extra race depended on the result, and 60% on the process. The candidates thought that it would be time to rest after this long-distance run, but unfortunately, when 80% of them arrived, they were informed that they would be sent to another place to prepare for the next test. Those who had arrived at the front of the additional long-distance run had it better. They still had some time to rest while waiting, but those who were at the back really had to climb up the transport plane while panting. Sillin and the others had it better. They were at the front, so when they arrived, less than 30% of the candidates had finished the run. According to Taita, after the 3+1 test would be the cooperation test. Originally, everyone guessed that the candidates would form their own teams for the test, but they didn't expect that the so-called cooperation did not only refer to the candidates who had come to participate in the selection test. The number of people transported by this transport plane for the cooperative test was less than 700. After the transport plane had transported the candidates to their destination, Sillin and the others got off the plane with everyone else. They discovered that they were at a wide, open-air training ground. However, it was obvious that this wasn't a test venue, but a gathering place. Moreover, there were already a lot of people stretching their muscles. Before Sillin could discuss the cooperation test with Libero and the others, a voice came from the training ground, Sillin. Sillin, it's really you. You're really my blood brother who doesn't share the same father and mother. What do you mean by blood brother who doesn't share the same father and mother? If your language teacher heard this, he would probably want to kill himself with a piece of tofu. The person shouting at the top of his voice was none other than the idiot Prince Bell. Zhen Xingming also ran over from the side. Sillin had a bad feeling when he saw the cheeky smiles on their faces. Bell ran over excitedly and gave Sillin a big hug under everyone's varied gazes. Then, he slapped Sillin's shoulder hard and said, I was just talking about you, and you're already here. You're really my blood brother. Sillin, it's so good to see you again. I didn't think that you'd actually be in this batch of candidates. Zhen Xingming was just as excited as he was. Another person ran over after Bell and Zhen Xingming. According to Bell's words, Sillin guessed that this was Uliganuo of the Blizzard Wendisca royal family who had been unlucky enough to be picked as the weakest pick and thrown into the army by his father. What's going on? Sillin slapped Bell's hand away and asked. Bell chuckled and didn't answer. He looked at Hui Mao and said, Wheeze, I've missed you so much. Hui Mao ignored Bell and stood on Sillin's shoulder with a straight face. He muttered to himself, Why didn't you say anything even if I missed you? I didn't even get a fish biscuit. Wheeze, I'll treat you to an all-fish meal and freshly baked fish biscuits at AF3's restaurant after the test. Bell added. Hui Mao grinned. I'm so happy to see you guys. Wally and the others. Seriously? While Bell and the others were chatting with Sillin, someone on the other side of the training field started shouting, Bell, you guys actually know someone over there. That's so unfair. You guys can be jealous and jealous all you want. Go find one yourself if you can. Bell said proudly. See, I actually know someone over here. He's going to enter AF1 and AF2 in the future. I'm not just a brother of his. Why is there a kid here? Uliganuo glanced at Taita who was standing not far behind Sillin with Libero and the others. Bell and Zhen Xingming looked over when they heard Uliganuo's words. I just saw him. Taita was annoyed. You guys can't look down on my height like that. Who's this kid? Do you know him? Bell asked Sillin. Normally, there were other ways to monitor kids like this. There weren't many people who participated in the selection test with someone in their teens or 20s. Oh, his name is Taita. There's also Libero, Wally, and Ironhead next to him. The 5 of us will be sharing a room, Sillin said. Taita. Why does this name sound so familiar? You're that old muscle student. Bell was kicked away by Zhen Xingming before he could finish. Zhen Xingming turned around and smiled at Sillin and the others, ignore him. He's been spouting nonsense lately. Chapter 243. After being kicked by Zhen Xingming, Bell clearly remembered that certain topics weren't suitable to be discussed in public. That was why he only chuckled a few times after he returned to the room. However, the way he looked at Taita was a little strange. Sillin didn't know why they were acting so strangely because of Taita's identity, but it didn't look like it was a good time to talk about it. He wouldn't press the issue any further. He would find out when the time came. Bell looked at Silen's team of 5 and asked Silen about the previous tests. Then, he turned around and asked Uliganuo, Gaga, what do you think? Wanna team up? Gaga, Libero and the others looked at Uliganuo in unison. They didn't expect him to have such a funny nickname. In fact, most people in AF3 called him Tula, and only a few people who were close to him would call him Ganua. For example, the relatives of Blizzard and the Vendiska royals. Apart from them, his best friends like Bell and Gen Xingming would call him Gaga, and only people like Bell and Gen Xingming could call him Gaga. If anyone else called him Uliganuo, they would definitely be shot or beaten up. It was only after Bell's explanation that Silen and the others learned what the 4th round of the cooperative test was like. The so-called cooperative test was a test in which the people of AF3 and the candidates would work together to form a team. There were 5 to 8 people in each team. There could be no less than 5 people and no more than 8 people. Of course, the teams with the same number of people could be made up of people from AF3, or they could be made up of examinees. Both the people of AF3 and the candidates really wanted to work together. The people of AF3 hoped to borrow the strength of the candidates, and the candidates hoped to learn a lot of information from the people of AF3. After all, the cooperative test was one of the tests the students of AF3 had to take during the semester, and it took up quite a large proportion of the test. They had no choice but to pay attention to it. When Bell, Gen Xingming and the others first learned that they were coming here to take the test, they were filled with bitterness and thought about how to deal with it every day. Who would have thought that they would run into Silen here? For candidates like Silen and the others, this test was extremely important. After all, this was the 4th test of the 5th examination. After this test, there was only the final interview left. It wasn't easy for him to last until now, so he couldn't drop the ball. A familiar voice interrupted Bell and Silen's conversation. Hey, you two know each other. Hearing this voice, Huimao shrank into Silen's arms. He closed his eyes and pretended to sleep, but his ears were pricked up. It clearly remembered that Bonner had been beaten up by this girl and rolled on the ground, but he still didn't dare to throw a tantrum. Libero and the others trembled when they saw the girl walking over. What a coincidence. Bell waved his hand when he saw the newcomer. We're already full. You can find someone else to join your party. TSK, do you think I care? The girl's gaze swept across Silen and the others before lingering on Huimao for 2 seconds. During these 2 seconds, Silen could clearly feel Huimao stiffen in his arms. It was only when the girl moved her gaze away that he slowly relaxed. After the girl left, Bell looked at Silen in confusion. You know my sister? No wonder I thought she looked familiar. She's your sister, your biological sister, isn't she? Silen said. Yeah, my mother thinks that my sister Kenancy's like this is all because of me. She's being wronged. Bell complained. Both children had grown up in completely different ways than expected. This was a sore spot in the Fire Eagle royal consort's heart. Back in the day, Kenancy was sweet and adorable when she was young. Of course, she was still quite pretty now. After all, she had the excellent genes of royalty. When she was young, Kenancy was called Sweetheart Kenancy. She was the sweet little princess in the hearts of the royal consort and the Fire Eagle royal family. But now, the word sweetheart couldn't even begin to describe her. The animals of AF1 called her Diamond Kenancy in private because she was incredibly strong and often went to AF1 to pick fights with the animals. Bonner was one of them. Silen didn't comment on Bell's words. We met your sister in the last round of the test. Gen Xingming and Uliganuo didn't react much to Silen's explanation since they were already used to it. No wonder she disappeared as soon as we got here. She went to pick a fight again. Bell nodded. There weren't too many explanations given for the 4th round. The examinees only knew about the 4th round from the students from AF3. Because of this, some examinees were willing to team up with students from AF3. Some examinees were interested in the background of the students from AF3, while others were interested in the information that the students from AF3 had. Otherwise, who would be willing to team up with those pampered nobles? Silen's team was already full. Belle and the other two were telling Silen about the things he needed to pay attention to during the long test. That was why they didn't need to waste any more time looking for a team. The venue for the fourth test wasn't far away from them. It was a small garden in AF1. Of course, this garden wasn't as simple as it sounded. There were a lot of traps and dangers lurking in the garden, and the students from previous batches wouldn't just watch and play like they did during the third test. They would fight for real, which was why the students of AF3 were so eager to team up with the candidates. Although these nobles were usually arrogant and domineering, they knew their place. After all, it was very difficult for them to sneak past the students of AF1 and AF2 on their own. Suddenly, a whistling sound came from the sky above. A pair of giant wings flapped, stirring up a gust of wind and stirring up the sand and dust on the ground. The man flew over everyone's heads and stood on the railing at the edge of the training ground, looking down at the candidates below. Half of his wings were tucked behind his back, giving him an intimidating appearance. "Yo, there's a lot of people here." Hearing this voice, Huimao scurried over to Silen's shoulder and said softly, "Yo, isn't this that guy?" The person who appeared so coquettishly and stood on a high vantage point was Zani, whom Silen had met the other day. Zani looked at the candidates below and said, "This time, I'll be one of your opponents. I hope you won't meet me, hee." After saying that, Zani looked at the candidates who were obviously different from the ones from AF3. After the previous test, the candidates definitely didn't look as neat and tidy as the students from AF3. Although I really want to call you junior brothers and sisters, the problem is, I don't know if you have the right to call me senior brother in the end. There was no need to be sarcasm in this sentence. Only those who had been accepted would go back and call Zani senior brother. However, it was obvious that these people weren't the final lineup. After this and the next interview, some people would be eliminated. After saying that, Zani didn't care about the candidate's anger and flapped his wings to leave the training ground. Zani left the training ground and flew towards the testing ground for the fourth test. When he got close to the testing ground, two people wearing flight suits flew over. They had seen Zani's situation at the training ground. "What's wrong, Zani? It's been less than half a minute. Based on your personality, shouldn't you have at least 5 minutes of speech time?" The person laughed. Based on their understanding of Zani, Zani should have fiercely looked down on the candidates at the training ground. However, in reality, Zani only said a few words and then left. Zani curled his lips. "I saw a guy who wasn't easy to deal with. I didn't want to waste time there." "Huh? There's someone you don't want to mess with? Who is it?" Before Zani could reply, a few other former students like Zani and the others came over. They didn't have wings, nor were they wearing flight suits. Their jumping ability was indeed very strong. They could jump very far from a small tree, and the sound they made was very soft, like the sound of sand being blown up by the wind. After hearing what Zani and the others said, he said, "Did you guys see the kid who got the K?" "The kid who got the K? Yeah, he's the guy who got the Purgatory Thunder Snake K in the shooting ground during the selection test." Purgatory Thunder Snake K. Zani's tone had changed. He had just returned from a mission, and he hadn't watched the first few tests at all. How could he not be surprised when he heard this? That was the Purgatory Thunder Snake K they were talking about. Only Guan Feng would give away a Purgatory Thunder Snake K. "You guys don't know? Then who are you talking about?" Zani thought for a moment before pulling up an image stored on his communicator. "Is it him?" The image Zani pulled up was none other than Silen. "Yes, it's him. He went into the shooting ground with a crate and got 50 out of 5 shots. I knew it." Zani flapped his wings. "I'll be leaving first. Take your time." After saying goodbye to the others, Zani flew in a certain direction. Not long after, he saw Goryo playing a game on a tree branch. "Hey, I just met your future junior brother." Goryo didn't even look up from his game. "Your teacher gave the K to the guy who dodged 4 of your shots." I know." Goryo continued playing. "You really don't know that you've fallen out of favor at all." Zani looked exasperated. Goryo snorted. "You should tell that to the others. Teacher brought that kid here to deal a blow to people's confidence." "Then are you going to meet them when they come in?" Zani asked. "No." Goryo answered straightforwardly. "Then I'm not going either. If his aim is accurate, then I'll be in trouble. If his aim isn't accurate, then I'll be in trouble too. After all, the Purgatory Thunder Snake's accidental damage rate is way too high." There was no way he was going to do something as unrewarding as this. While Zani and Goryo were talking, the students and examinees of AF3 had entered the testing area in small groups. Since it was called AF1's Little Garden, there were plenty of flowers and trees, but there were also plenty of poisonous creatures. The most interesting thing about this place was that most of the species here had been taught in AF3 before. If the students had paid attention to their lectures, they would have a much easier time here, or at least they would have a better understanding of the subject. But the problem was, how many students from AF3 like Belle who had come here to participate in the semester examinations were actually paying attention to their lectures? It was already good enough that they didn't skip class. That was why the AF3 students beat their chests and stomped their feet in frustration when they saw some of the familiar yet inexplicable species. Why didn't they pay attention to this class back then? No wonder the instructor was laughing like a thief after class. Belle, Zhen Xingming, and the others felt the same way. "I feel like I'm being tricked by the botany instructor," Belle said. "I've only been to his class less than 3 times. There are a lot of species that I don't recognize." Zhen Xingming stared at the little white flowers in front of him. He remembered the old botany instructor saying that they were poisonous, but he didn't know if it was the flowers, the leaves, or the roots. Either way, they're poisonous. Ulagannuo decisively avoided the little white flowers. Libero and the others were a little speechless. These children from AF3 really didn't know how to cherish their time. Many people wanted to enter the affiliated schools, but these people who were in the affiliated schools were busy skipping classes. It was really infuriating to compare oneself with others. Huimao didn't follow Silin here. Pets weren't allowed in this exam, so Huimao went to make friends with his new friends. Silin looked at the little white flowers and sniffed them. Then, he used a knife to cut open the stems and leaves. Looking at the sticky, transparent liquid that flowed out, he said, "This liquid is poisonous. It's a neurotoxin, but it won't kill you. At most, it'll knock you out." Silin collected some of this liquid. Belle and the others thought of something and collected some as well. That way, they would have some tricks up their sleeves if they ran into any enemies. What's that sound?" Wally pricked his ears. "It sounds like a child crying," Taita said. "That's a man-eating salamander. It's pretty dangerous, but there's a water source over there." Belle knew about this. They had all taken that zoology class. Man-eating salamanders were amphibians. They had a flat front body and a flat tail. There were obvious skin folds on both sides of their bodies. Their bodies were smooth and scaleless, but they were covered in all kinds of stripes and mucus. Their teeth were sharp and dense. They didn't chew on their prey, but swallowed it whole. They could easily swallow an adult. There was indeed a stream over there. Silin and the others just stood and looked at it from afar. There were grayish-brown creatures about 5 meters long lying on the sides of the stream and some protruding rocks. They were all screaming, and when they screamed, they revealed their fine, sharp teeth. "Let's go. Don't provoke these violent guys," Belle said. Not long after Silin's group left the stream belt, Silin suddenly stopped in his tracks and looked towards a certain direction. After Silin stopped in his tracks, the rest of them also reacted swiftly and took defensive stances. However, when they saw who was slowly walking towards them, Belle and the others immediately hid behind Silen. Zhen Xingming was the fastest of them all. Silen looked at the person slowly walking towards them. Everyone could guess who he was. After all, this person looked quite similar to Zhen Xingming, but he definitely wasn't a candidate or a student of AF3. Chapter 244. Another member of the Zhen family? That person approached from afar, showing no signs of stopping. Celine did not move either. Just like that, she watched as he got closer and closer. Suddenly, Celine's pupils shrank. She tilted her head slightly to look at a large tree beside that person. The next moment, a woman appeared on the trunk of the large tree. The woman's hair was cropped to her ears, and her eyes were sharp despite the smile on her face. A single glance from her was enough to make a person feel an invisible pressure. There was a tiger's tooth blade stuck in her leather ankle boot. Needless to say, everyone knew that this woman wasn't easy to deal with. The sound she made when she landed on the tree was no different from a leaf falling on a tree trunk. If Libero hadn't seen her appear on the tree with his own eyes, he wouldn't have been able to detect her presence with his ears alone. Just like that, the woman crossed her arms and stared at Silen's group with a hint of a smile on the corner of her eyes. It was obvious that she was one of the former students. Xingyao, no wonder you're running this way. Your younger brother is here. The woman said as she glanced at Zhen Xingming who was standing behind Silen. Zhen Xingyao didn't say anything. He shot a glance at Silen who was hiding behind Silen before shifting his attention back to Zhen Xingming. Belle poked his head out from behind Silen and said to Zhen Xingyao, "Hey, second brother Zhen, can't you be merciful and pretend that you didn't see us?" Zhen Xingming remained silent. He knew his brother's personality all too well. There was no way he would let them go after running into them. They could only fight. Belle looked at the woman standing on the tree with a pitiful expression after Zhen Xingyao ignored him. "Sister Sula, please have mercy." Sula stomped her foot lightly on the ground, and the tiger's fang blade that was stuck in her short boot flew into the air. She gripped the blade tightly and looked at Belle with a smile. "I'm sorry, Your Highness Belle, but I can't break the rules either. If I do, my pay will be deducted. You know that the fixed allowance we students receive isn't even enough to buy you a car door. If I lose it again, I'll have to resort to robbery." Belle, Zhen Xingming, and Ulagacha retreated at the same time knowing that this battle was unavoidable. Zhen Xingming grabbed Taita by the collar and pulled him back, leaving the battlefield to Silen, Libero, Ironhead, and Wally. Wally glanced at Silen and the others who were still standing where they were, then turned around to look at Zhen Xingming and the others who had retreated to hide behind a tree not far away. Then, he ran towards them as well. "Aren't you going to fight?" Zhen Xingming and the other two were astonished. Normally speaking, weren't the participants of the 5th grade exam pretty enthusiastic? Wally shook his head and squeezed Belle a little deeper into the crowd. "Please leave some space for me." Now only Silen, Libero, and Ironhead were left on the other side. Suddenly remembering something, Zhen Xingming mustered his courage and poked Silen again. He whispered, "Don't use those two things unless it's absolutely necessary." Then, Zhen Xingming slipped back behind the tree like his but was on fire and watched the battle unfold with Belle and the others. The two things Zhen Xingming was referring to were the Purgatory Thunder Snake K and the blade. Zhen Xingming was his older brother after all, and he believed in Silen's abilities. That was why he knew very well just how destructive those two things in Silen's possession could be. In fact, Silen wouldn't have thought of using those two things even if Zhen Xingming hadn't mentioned it. He had been looking forward to fighting against a member of the Zhen family for a long time now. Sula twirled the tiger fang blade in her hand and ran towards Libero and Ironhead in a whoosh. Before participating in the test, Libero knew that they had no chance of winning against these former students if they kept fighting like this. Therefore, some sharp spikes started growing out of Libero's body before Sula jumped over. Then, some dark-colored hard material quickly appeared on the surface of his body, and 3 rows of bone plates popped out of his back. The tips of the bone plates were as sharp as blades. Ironhead, on the other hand, didn't have bone plates like Libero's, but his entire body glowed with a metallic luster. His entire body looked like a solidified metal. A mutant? Sula twisted her body in midair when she came into contact with the bone plates on Libero's back. The tip of her foot tapped on one of the bone plates and spun around. A steel claw popped out of her wrist and covered her fingers like a glove. ZZZT, Sula grabbed the largest bone plate on Libero's back with the steel claw and swung her arm. Bang! Libero's entire body was smashed into the ground. Sula didn't continue attacking Libero after the successful attack. Instead, she evaded Ironhead's punch and let out a screeching noise when her steel claw made contact with Ironhead's body. Sparks of metal could be seen from the friction, but the claw only left a few shallow scratches on Ironhead's body. Sula flipped over and lay flat on the tree trunk. She glanced at her blunt steel claws and flung them away. Her claws had been damaged to a certain extent when she grabbed onto the bone plate on Libero's back, and the wear and tear on her iron head meant that she couldn't use them anymore. It must have taken a lot of effort for these two half-mutants to make it this far. Sula smiled and continued to charge at Ironhead. On the other side, Sillin and Zhen Xingyao had also begun fighting. The Zhen family liked to use their palms when they fought alone. This was the conclusion Sillin had learned from Zhenya. Punching the skin, and hitting the insides with their palms. Only when palm techniques were used to a certain degree would they have the power to damage the insides. Sillin had learned a bit about the destructive power of palm strikes from Zhenya, but Zhenya's body wasn't in good shape at the time. Moreover, Zhenya had taught Sillin some modified techniques that were used to nourish one's body. Sillin wouldn't lose to Zhen Xingyao in terms of speed. That was why Zhen Xingyao didn't find a suitable opportunity to attack during the first exchange. However, it wasn't to say that Zhen Xingyao didn't have the speed to do so. When Zhen Xingyao increased his speed, Sillin assumed a defensive stance because he knew that Zhen Xingyao's counterattack was coming. Triple stack palm. The continuous palm shadows overlapped each other, and each palm was stronger than the last. It looked very imposing, but Celine knew that the threefold palm was not a killing move. Instead, it was part of a killing move, and its purpose was not to kill. Zhenya had demonstrated the killer move before, and although it wasn't complete since he couldn't execute it in his current condition at the time, Sillin had learned a thing or two from the explanation. Therefore, he had a way to deal with Zhen Xingyao's triple-fold palms. The one that could counter the triple-stack palm was water-severing draw. There was no blade, and there was no need for a blade. Sillin shook his arms, and as his arms moved, the airflow around him also began to become unstable. Two strong convection movements caused by his arms swiftly formed a strong airflow vortex that rotated at high speed. Like a sharp blade that appeared out of nowhere, it charged upwards diagonally and forcefully cut through the 3 layers of hand shadows. Water-severing draw couldn't counter a killer move, but the triple-stack palm that was a part of a killer move wasn't impossible to counter. Sillin rarely used these techniques back when he was in a hunter regiment. Back then, he was a hunter, and all he used in battle were killer moves. They weren't complicated or flashy, but they were all killer moves that could kill in one hit. However, Sillin wanted to give it a try since he ran into someone from the Zhen family. It had been a long time since he last used water-severing draw, but it still felt so familiar to him now that it was almost an instinct. When the triple-stack palm was formed, water-severing draw had appeared in Sillin's mind on its own. Zhen Xingyao paused for a moment after withdrawing his palm because of water-severing draw. He looked at Sillin with a slightly strange and doubtful gaze, but he didn't pause for long before he launched the next round of attacks. Hiding behind a tree and watching the battle, Bell nudged Zhen Xingming with his elbow and whispered, "Don't you think that Sillin is a little too calm? It's like he can predict what move he's going to make next. He also seems to know which ones are killer moves and which ones aren't. I don't know what kind of moves the Zhen family uses, but I have a feeling that Sillin is very familiar with them. Otherwise, your brother should be able to find a way to attack even if he doesn't intend to use a killer move." Zhen Xingming frowned and didn't answer Bell's question. His thoughts drifted back to the battle on the rooftop of the bar that day. When Silen pulled out his blade to block Goryo's bullet, Zhen Xingming had caught a brief glimpse of it. Although it was only for a brief moment, Silen's movements when he pulled out the blade were somewhat similar to water-severing draw. This was one of the reasons why Zhen Xingming suddenly felt a sense of familiarity. Why was it one of the reasons? Because there was another sense of familiarity that Zhen Xingming hadn't found yet. Xingming, do you think Silen might be the illegitimate child of someone in your family? Ulaganyuo asked while rubbing his chin. Although many nobles lived a rotten life, they valued legitimate birth very much. This was especially true for the 4 nobles who stood at the top of the hierarchy, the monarch and the 3 kings. Only those with legitimate birth would be recognized. Those with illegitimate birth would most likely be killed, and those nobles who had an illegitimate birth would be severely punished. Therefore, even if Zhen Xingming liked to pick up girls, there were some things that he had to be extra careful about. If he accidentally created a child with an illegitimate birth, his old man would definitely break his leg. Zhen Xingming kicked Ulaganyuo's foot when he heard what he said. Bullshit. Everyone with legitimate birth in the Fuji Zhen family in Upper Tree has proof, and those with illegitimate birth will be killed. If Silen really was the illegitimate child of someone in the Zhen family, then Silen would be killed by the upper echelons of the Fuji royal family. This was something that Zhen Xingming and the others didn't want to see, so no one brought up the topic again. However, Zhen Xingming couldn't help but think that way even if they didn't bring it up. While Zhen Xingming was in a dilemma, Zhen Xingyao's surroundings began to change. The distorted air currents refracted light, and Zhen Xingyao's figure turned blurry for a time. Many parts of his body appeared, and it was impossible to tell where Zhen Xingyao actually stood. Blinded by a single leaf. Silen wasn't in a hurry to act. Instead, he stood where he was and waited quietly with his hands hanging by his sides. Suddenly, Silen made his move. The moment Silen decided to act, a palm broke through the distorted light and slapped at Silen's side. Silen had no doubt that his internal organs would be severely injured if he was hit by this palm. It was still a reflexive movement. The disturbed arm drew an arc in the air, shook violently, and sent out a palm strike that was 70 to 80% similar to the one that broke through the light. The thread in Zhen Xingming's brain snapped when he saw this. Impossible. If he wasn't a member of the Zhen family, if he wasn't a core member of the Zhen family, there was no way he would know this move. Even if it was only 70 to 80% similar, but... Bell exchanged a glance with Ulaganyuo when he saw Zhen Xingming's clenched fists. They sandwiched Zhen Xingming in the middle to prevent him from doing something bad on impulse. After a loud boom, Silen and Zhen Xingyao both retreated. Neither side seemed to be hurt, but 2 seconds later, the sleeves of their arms that had clashed with each other turned to dust. Coincidentally, Silen was using his left arm, and the glove on his hand had turned to dust because of the palm strike. A curly green pattern in the shape of a leaf stuck tightly to the knuckle of Silen's left thumb. Zhen Xingyao had lost all will to fight the moment he saw this pattern. Chapter 245. In the Fuji royal Zhen family, only those of legitimate birth in every generation would have the proof of being a member of the Upper Tree Fuji Zhen family. However, that was only proof of legitimate birth, not proof of identity. Was there a difference between proof of birth and proof of identity? Yes. Perhaps there was no difference between the two for a normal person, but there was a huge difference for a royal family like the Zhen family. There were a lot of people in the Zhen family who had proof of legitimate birth. In Zhen Xingming's generation, there were a few cousins who had proof of legitimate birth other than himself and his siblings. But proof of identity was a different story. The Zhen family's proof of identity wasn't something any ordinary person could get their hands on. Take Zhen Xingming's generation for example. Only Zhen Xingming, Zhen Xingyao, and a few other blood-related brothers had the special proof of identity because their father was the current King Fuji, so they had a special proof of identity that was different from the rest of the Zhen family. For example, there was a leaf pattern on Zhen Xingyao's wrist that looked like a bracelet. Of course, if the next King Fuji wasn't chosen from one of them, then the final King Fuji would have the same proof of identity. However, the Gen family was different from the Fire Eagle royal family. Most of the time, the Gen family's heir to the throne was passed down from the previous King Fuji to his own son. Therefore, the bloodline was more concentrated. However, what shocked Gen Xingyao the most was why Silan had a proof of identity that belonged to the Gen family. Moreover, it definitely didn't belong to their generation. In their generation, proof of identity wasn't attached to their fingers, but to their wrists or arms. Gen Xingyao didn't doubt the authenticity of the leaf pattern on Silan's finger at all. His attention wasn't on Silan's finger just now, but the moment the glove on Silan's hand turned to dust, a sense of familiarity and an inexplicable attraction suddenly forced Gen Xingyao's attention. That was why Gen Xingyao's original intention to cause trouble for Gen Xingming and the others vanished completely. What could possibly be more important than the Gen family? However, Gen Xingyao wondered which generation the proof of identity on his finger belonged to. His father's generation seemed to have a badge attached to his chest. As for his grandfather's generation, Gen Xingyao's pupils contracted and his heart pounded. It was just a blurry memory, and he wasn't sure, but it seemed like his grandfather's generation was one of those people. The more Gen Xingyao thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. The more he thought about it, the more he wanted to ask his grandfather about it. After all, they didn't know much about the matters of their grandfather's generation. However, if they were to suddenly ask about it, who knew how big of a wave the Gen family would cause? Just as Gen Xingyao let go of his offensive instincts and his expression flickered with a myriad of thoughts, Gen Xingming and the others grew impatient. Due to the angle, Gen Xingming and the others didn't see the leaf pattern on Silan's finger. Silan put his hand back into his pocket after the leaf pattern appeared. Silan had been planning to reveal the leaf curl pattern to the public since the beginning. He had planned to start with Gen Xingming, but he never found a good opportunity to do so. Moreover, Gen Xingming didn't look very reliable, and there was no telling what would happen if he learned about it. Therefore, Silan decided to reveal the information to Gen Xingyao the moment he ran into him. As expected, Gen Xingyao was a lot calmer than Gen Xingming. He didn't make a fuss after seeing the leaf pattern on Silan's finger. Instead, he was thinking about the best way to deal with the situation and prioritize the bigger picture. Gen Xingming was about to speak when he saw that the other side had stopped, but Gen Xingyao shot him a look. They were blood brothers after all, and some things didn't need to be said out loud. A look was enough to understand what the other was trying to convey. After receiving the hint from Gen Xingyao's eyes, Gen Xingming's plan to interrogate Silan and clarify the doubts in his heart was put on hold. He knew that Gen Xingyao must have discovered more clues. When it came to proper business, Gen Xingming himself knew that it was better to listen to his brother Gen Xingyao. Since Gen Xingyao wasn't planning to continue, Sula, who had just decided to incapacitate Libero and Iron Head, stopped attacking as well. She tossed Iron Head away and didn't attack again. It took a long time for Iron Head to return in a daze. Libero, who had been smashed into the ground again and again before the bone plate on his back could do much, slowly came back to his senses. He shook his head a few times to clear his mind. "I hope you won't tell anyone about some things before I figure them out." Gen Xingyao's words were thick with warning, and he left quickly after that. The task of supervising Silan had been passed to Gen Xingming. Sula shot Silan a puzzled look, but she didn't ask. After all, even if there was a problem, it was the Fuji royal family's problem. She wasn't stupid enough to get involved. She flicked her finger lightly and put the tiger tooth blade back into her boot. Then, she left behind a meaningful smile and left. It took Libero and Iron Head a long time to regain their consciousness after the duo had left. "Fuck, that woman is too strong. She's so strong alone," Libero said while rubbing the wounds on his body after he had returned to his normal state. Silan nodded in agreement. Of course she was strong. Using the League of Stars' standards, Sula's genotype was A rank. It would be strange if she wasn't strong after her training. People like Zhen Xingming and Belle who had good genes might not necessarily be as strong as someone with bad genes who had gone through strict training. However, they didn't need to deal with this on their own. There were plenty of powerful people protecting them, and every one of them was loyal to them. This was the privilege of nobles, and it was perfectly normal under such a system. Sillin had seen Libero and Ironhead before. Using the League of Stars' standards, Libero's genotype was A rank, and Ironhead's genotype was slightly weaker. However, they might not necessarily lose to Sula after joining the affiliated school and undergoing training. It was obvious that Zhen Xingming wasn't treating Sillin as naturally as he used to be. In fact, he even wondered if Sillin was one of his illegitimate children who had been forced to live on the streets for a long time. Although he didn't see the leaf pattern on Sillin's hands, the way Sillin fought Zhen Xingyao was enough to make Zhen Xingming think that way. However, Taita didn't think that much. He simply thought that Sillin was very strong. The fact that he was able to fight Zhen Xingyao to this extent was already amazing enough. After all, Libero and Ironhead had been beaten up badly by Sula in comparison. Taita admired the strong a lot because the education and environment he had grown up in was different from royalty like Belle and the others. He didn't want to be protected by others all the time like a fragile object. That was why he quickly agreed to participate in the affiliated school's selection test when his father mentioned it. Taita followed behind Sillin and asked Sillin about his usual training techniques. His father once said that a strong person couldn't do without strict training. Sillin selectively answered some of Taita's questions and made his answers vague. After all, he couldn't very well tell a child's older brother that his current achievements were due to his years of experience in the battlefield, could he? Wouldn't that be asking a child to kill someone? Not every child could smash a person's head off without batting an eyelid like Tang Qiuqiu. Strangely enough, Sillin and the others didn't run into any other past graduates after Zhen Xingyao and Sula showed up. It should be noted that the past graduates were the ones who had given them a show of strength, and it was also the affiliated school's permission to let the past graduates teach the examinees and EF3 students a lesson. The past graduates were more than happy to do so. They could transfer the anger they usually received from their instructors to these people and let them experience the pain they had become numb to. However, the current situation was that Sillin and the others didn't run into any past graduates for a long time. They did run into a few other teams, but they only casually chatted about their encounters and brushed past each other without saying much. A few figures gathered together at a valley that Sillin and the others had just passed by. "Are you really not going to meet that kid?" one of them asked. "Nope. You can go if you want," another person answered. Another person curled his lips, "That kid is going to EF1 for sure anyway. It's not too late to meet him after he actually gets into EF1. We'll get to watch a good show then." "Hey, you're wrong. What do you mean wait for him to get into EF1? How are you so sure that he'll get into EF1 in the end? Maybe he'll be assigned to EF2 in the end. It's Teacher Griffin who recommended him." Griffin was an instructor at EF2, and her words carried a lot of weight in EF2. "TSK, why don't you think about who gave that kid the Purgatory Thunder Snake K? It's that old Fox Guan. Do you think that old Fox Guan will let him go? Of course he'll be assigned to EF1. Nothing is absolute." While the past graduates were debating about where Sillin would end up, Sillin himself wasn't in the mood to think about it. He didn't really care about EF1 or EF2, and the instructors he had were all the same. Right now, Sillin was studying a few plants that he encountered along the way, but none of them knew anything when he asked Belle and the others. What was the difference between monocotyledons and dicotyledons? What was the difference between gymnosperms and angiosperms? Belle and the others couldn't answer these basic questions. All they could do was shake their heads, and there was no way they could ask any deeper questions. In the end, Sillin could only ponder on his own. He couldn't count on these three good-for-nothings. Even if they told him that chrysanthemum leaves were coriander, Sillin would still doubt the validity of their answers. Since there were no past graduates to interfere, Sillin's group only needed to pay attention to the traps and the attacks of other creatures in the area. However, these were all trivial matters. Scylla, Libero, and Ironhead had already taken care of them. Therefore, for Tida, this test was basically a trip to catch and eat wild game. The little guy was having a lot of fun. A few days later, Scylla's group exited the area. Judging from their current condition, injuries, and time of arrival, their results weren't bad. At the very least, Belle and the others had gotten a good score in this test. When they saw the injuries of the candidates who came out later, Scylla's group was much luckier than they were. Libero and Ironhead couldn't help but sigh. They were only covered in superficial wounds, unlike the other candidates who had broken tendons and broken bones. Perhaps some of them had been severely beaten by the past graduates and were severely dispirited, but some of them were the type to grow stronger with every setback. That being said, no matter how serious their injuries were, it wouldn't stop them from participating in the next test, which was the final test of the 5th exam, the interview. After the 4th test, Scylla's group of 5 separated from Belle and the others. Before they parted ways, Zhen Xingming ran over to Scylla and said a few words to Scylla in private. He wanted to tell Scylla to keep a low profile for the time being, especially when it came to the Zhen family. He wanted to wait until his brother figured out what was going on. Scylla had no objections. If he couldn't find the answer himself, he would leave it to his brothers. Zhen Xingming left a little awkwardly after receiving a nod from Scylla. He was even thinking that he wouldn't see another brother the next time they met. As for the rest of the candidates, they all thought that the last test should be the easiest since they had passed the first 4 tests, right? Wasn't the interview just talking to the teachers? However, the previous graduates who had the same experience didn't think so. Although the final interview was indeed just a matter of talking, you had to be able to move your body first. When Scylla entered the interview hall, he saw a circle of teachers sitting inside the circular hall. The candidates who came for the interview were sitting at the center. Everyone's gaze was focused on him, giving him the illusion that he was a monkey being watched. Scylla didn't have stage fright. It's not like he was going to lose a piece of flesh, right? After calmly sitting down, one of the instructors smiled amiably. He flipped through the information in his hands and asked, "Your results in the written test are not bad. Looking at your general situation, you seem to have a certain level of understanding in the field of genes." "A little bit," Scylla answered. "All right then, I'll ask you about genetics." The leading teacher tapped the table with his finger as if he wanted to ask something. After some thought, the teacher asked with interest, "You've met King Kong before, haven't you? That naughty chimpanzee?" "Yes." "All right then. Tell me, between you and King Kong, whose Y chromosome is bigger?" "Scylla." "Fuck." Chapter 246. Although it was just an interview, and although it didn't require as much energy as the previous tests, most people would rather undergo those physical tests than go through this kind of crazy mental test. The people in front of Scylla had all left through another door, so those waiting for the interview couldn't communicate with those who had already finished the interview. However, Scylla didn't need to ask to know how those who had already finished the interview would react. Scylla looked at the teachers in the interview hall who had friendly smiles on their faces, but who gave him the urge to smack them with a brick. He sighed in his heart. What kind of topic were these people asking? Finally, the main teacher changed after asking 2 questions. Next to him, an old scholar with a RAS badge flipped through the information and said to Scylla, "I've seen your written test answers. You have some understanding of zoology. So let me ask you, if you were a coelenterate, like a sea anemone, and if you were a sea anemone, what kind of partner would you find?" Scylla, why did he have to use a sea anemone, a primitive and simple animal that only had a mouth but no anus, ate and excreted through the same mouth, and didn't even have the most basic brain as an example? What kind of partner would he find? If one didn't know how to answer, the best way to do so was to ask directly. "May I ask if the sea anemone you're talking about is a hermaphrodite or a dioecious type?" Scylla looked at the old scholar. "Does a sea anemone need to find a partner?" The old scholar smiled kindly. "Does a sea anemone have the ability to find a partner?" "No." "Have you studied it before?" 5 minutes later, the old scholar finally let go of Silen and put down the information with a smile. He picked up the glass of water next to him and began to drink tea slowly. The next person to ask the question was a gentle middle-aged man, but Silen wouldn't classify him as a perverted teacher, just because of his appearance. "Don't be nervous. I won't ask those disgusting questions," the gentle middle-aged man said. Silen curled his lips in his heart. "As if I'd believe you." The middle-aged man opened a holographic screen. There was a paragraph of text on it. "This is a paragraph from AF1's Student Code of Conduct. It's not very long, only about 1,000 words. The content is also very simple, so my request is for you to read this paragraph in 2 languages." Silen looked at the words on the holographic screen and thought to himself, sure enough, none of these tutors are easy to deal with. Because, although the words on the holographic screen were not long, the problem was that the order was reversed. It was much more difficult to read a passage backwards than to follow it. The simpler the vocabulary and the more common the language, the easier it was to mispronounce it. This was because your brain had a habit of thinking. When you understood the meaning, you would reflexively read the word out loud instead of reading it backwards. And in 2 languages. As expected, he was deliberately making things difficult for others. Silen thought for a moment before reading the words on the light screen again. First, he used the dialect of Old Man Chang's planet to read the words out loud. Then, he used the common language of the Empire to read the words out loud. Silen was quite satisfied with himself after he finished reading the words. He didn't pause too mechanically, and he didn't make any mistakes. Not bad." The middle-aged man nodded and turned off the holographic screen. With a harmless expression, he said, "Then, please recite what you just said. Don't be nervous, just recite as much as you can." Fortunately, Silen had a good memory. Coupled with the fact that he had practiced reverse thinking when he was assembling parts, it did not take much effort for him to answer the middle-aged man's question. After Silen recited the passage fluently, the middle-aged man nodded and gestured for the next tutor to ask the question. He then buried his head in writing. After the middle-aged man, there was a fashionably dressed woman with an intellectual aura. She did not look like she was going through menopause, but since she was sitting here, Silen was sure that this woman was more difficult to deal with than the menopausal women he had met before. The female tutor did not smile. Seeing that it was her turn to ask a question, she asked directly, "Do you know about the incident with the Bistrit family?" "I know a little." Silen had learned a little about it from some media. The Bistrit family was a medium noble family, not some small noble family. However, they were too unscrupulous and had violated the Empire's laws in many private matters. Not long ago, the entire planet was seriously polluted because of their medicine production. Then, they failed to take effective measures immediately, causing the nearby residential planets to be infected as well. Billions of people fell ill, and more than 10 million people died. This incident was the fuse that led to the Bistrit family's downfall. After the pollution incident, the other families who disliked the Bistrit family or were enemies of the Bistrit family joined forces and appealed to the Mist Bodhisattva royal family. After a lot of effort on the Three Kings' side, the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor finally announced that the Bistrit family's noble title would be revoked. Many people applauded and cheered. "Very well. Please tell us your thoughts on this matter." Silen let out a sigh of relief when he heard the female tutor's question. This kind of question was easier to answer. After all, a lot of media outlets had reported about the incident, so Silen gave a brief explanation based on the information they had obtained. However, he didn't go into too much detail about his own opinion. It was because he had only learned about the incident from the media. The media's opinion would guide the public's opinion, and no one knew what was really going on behind the scenes. What you see may not be the truth, and what you hear may not be the truth. However, if you really want to give a subjective opinion, you can't say anything without investigating the matter yourself. Therefore, the above is limited to, Silen gave a brief explanation. He didn't think that the female tutor wanted to hear a long speech from him, nor did she want to hear Silen criticize the filthy nobles. Therefore, after Silen's brief explanation, the female tutor looked quite satisfied. However, this wasn't her only question. She asked another one. More than 10 days ago, an alien riot occurred on a planet in the 22nd star region of the Empire. However, not long after, a rare large-scale natural disaster occurred on that planet. Some people said that this was God's punishment for the rioting aliens. What do you think? What a sensitive topic. This was to test Silen's opinion on the aliens. These questions weren't only the female tutors, but also the questions asked by the previous few tutors. Not only did they test Silen's understanding of certain aspects, but they also tested Silen's character as a person. The fifth exam of the AF5 tested the physical, psychological, and physical defects of the candidates. The physical and psychological defects of the candidates had already been tested, and the psychological defects of the candidates had also been observed in the previous tests. In the last interview, they would test again to see if this person was extreme, racist, or crazy. After all, there was only a thin line between a genius and a lunatic. After answering the female tutor's question, the other tutors asked their own questions as well. Their questions were just as perverted as before. This interview was seriously the strangest and most unbearable interview Silen had ever experienced in his life. There were even some questions that were not suitable for children that the instructors could ask him, like they were researching an academic problem. If these tutors were the ones teaching AF1 and AF2, then there probably wouldn't be many normal students in the end. No wonder Bell said that the students of AF1 and AF2 were all abnormal. Even a normal person would come out of AF1 and AF2 completely different. Silen felt that his interview time was too long. Some of the people before him didn't even have this much time. What Silen didn't know was that it was exactly because he was jointly recommended by Griffin and Guan Feng that the mentors were asking him questions so enthusiastically. Griffin wasn't the only one, and the Gen family was also adding fuel to the fire from behind the scenes. That was why Silen's interview time was the longest. The people lining up behind Silen were still wondering if the interviewing instructors had taken a break. Otherwise, why hadn't they called for the next candidate after such a long time? He had been feeling restless for a long time already. When Silen walked out of the interview room, he felt as if he had just been released from prison and seen the light of day again. He turned around and looked at the interview room that had already closed its doors. He wondered if coming to AF1 was the right decision after all. After the interview was over, the candidates could return to their temporary dorms and wait for the final announcement. When Silen returned, Libero and Ironhead were already there. Both of them looked listless. It looked like the interview was a big blow to them. According to Ironhead, one of the tutors asked him, "How many rocks are there in a 1-kilometer radius around the interview hall?" Ironhead didn't answer. "Are you stupid? Can't you just say a number? It's not like the tutors are going to check it for real." Hui Mao said disdainfully. Ironhead sighed. "The problem is," the tutor added, "please prove it," after asking the question. Hui Mao stopped talking and turned his head to eat his fish biscuit. Although Ironhead was depressed when the interview ended, he felt much better knowing that everyone's situation was similar. The results of AF1's 5th test came out soon. Those who were accepted would be given a communicator. When the time came, someone would contact you through this communicator. The 5 people in Silen's dorm received the communicator. Ironhead and Libero were quite excited, while Taita and Wally were much calmer. However, as soon as Taita received the communicator, he was taken away by the old servant who had brought him here. Wally was also called away by a communicator on the same day and never returned. The next day, someone came to pack Wally's things. They said they were Wally's senior brothers. What did they mean by senior brothers? Most of the candidates who were accepted would be assigned to a mentor based on the results of the 5 tests, and the former students under that mentor would have a close relationship with the new candidates. As for the former students under other mentors, although they would also address each other as senior brothers and senior sisters, there was no close relationship. This was the difference. Not long after Wally left, Silen's communicator also received a call. Are you in the temporary dorm? The image that popped up on the communicator showed Guan Feng's face. He still looked as harmless and serious as ever. Yes, Silen answered. All right, pack your things. Your senior brother will come and pick you up later. Guan Feng ended the call after saying this. Silen looked at the closed communicator and said goodbye to Libero and Iron Head. Then, he dragged Huimao back to his room to pack his things. Huimao leaned against the cabinet and watched Silen pack his things lazily. From time to time, he would give some instructions. Hey, there's also this, the spoils of war I got from Dar. Silen took out a crocodile skin from under the bed and tossed it into the bag. There's also a rhinoceros horn inside. I bit it off. Huimao said while pointing under the bed. Silen threw the bag away, twisted Huimao off the cabinet and shoved it under the bed. Clean it yourself. Huimao had piled some junk under the bed. There were also some carcasses of insects he had played to death but didn't eat. Throw them out if you can't eat them in the future. Don't pile them under the bed and let them mold. These insects aren't moldy, I asked them. Huimao said while wagging his tail under the bed. The them Huimao was referring to was King Kong, Bonner and the other animals. I don't care. If you keep piling insects under the bed, I'll throw you out with these insects. Fine. Because he couldn't bear to throw away these insects, Huimao swept them all into his stomach. Silen couldn't help but sigh when he saw Huimao's appearance. This cat has grown fatter again. Silen didn't leave many things in the room. Goryo drove over in a flying car not long after he finished packing. Yo, Silen. We finally meet again. Goryo greeted Silen. Silen greeted him, bid farewell to Libero and Ironhead, and then led Huimao into Goryo's car. Where are we going? Silen asked. To the instructor's place. Instructor Guan is treating everyone to a meal today, so everyone can get to know your little junior brother, Goryo said. But the corner of his mouth twitched unnaturally when he said this. How many disciples does Instructor Guan have? Our instructor has a strange temper and a high bar. Not many. Counting you and me, there are two more, a senior brother and a senior sister. The senior brother is Pastura, and the senior sister is Fu Qingqing. However, Goryo paused for a moment before continuing, the three of us aren't allowed to use the Purgatory Thunder Snake K. Even if the senior brother and sister think that they are capable of using it, our instructor still hasn't given them permission to use it. Therefore, you are the only one allowed to use it among us. It's inevitable that the senior brother and sister will have different opinions about it. Goryo was reminding Silen that the senior brother and sister he hadn't met yet would have a problem with him, and conflict was inevitable. But Silen wasn't afraid. What's there to be afraid of? Let's fight them back. Huimao said while crouching on Silen's shoulder. Goryo didn't interrupt. He had done his research on this cat. He wasn't confident that he could deal with a cat that could bully panthers so much that he wanted to crawl into the ground and make the domineering giant crocodile doll cry. That being said, Goryo couldn't help but wonder if that old fox Guan Feng had forcefully snatched Silen away from Griffin because Silen had this cat with him. It was a 2-for-1 deal. Goryo drove his flying car to a relatively empty area where a relatively large spaceplane was parked. The spaceplane's hatch opened when it saw Goryo's flying car, and Goryo immediately flew inside. This is Guan Feng's personal spaceplane, but he doesn't have just one. If you want to go somewhere during the holidays, just ask him for one. He won't refuse. Goryo led Silen into the spaceplane's cockpit. Guan Feng's personal spaceplane took Silen from this AF-1 preparatory campus planet to the bigger planet where the main campus was located. The three affiliated schools each occupied a planet, but most of the time, AF-1 and AF-2 students preferred to ignore AF-3. It was because AF-1 was the only school that had the right to compete with AF-2. AF-1 and AF-2 were the top schools in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. There were geniuses everywhere, and geniuses always liked to compete with each other. That was why AF1 and AF2 constantly competed with each other in the open and in the shadows. On the other hand, AF3's students were very calm. They didn't complain even if they were often ignored. In fact, they were actually very happy. At the very least, being ignored was better than being targeted. Nothing good would come out of being targeted by AF1 and AF2. That was why AF1 and AF2's students often referred to each other as neighbors instead of AF1 and AF2. AF2 students especially. Why did they have to be called AF2? It sounded like they were far inferior to AF1 students. In reality, AF1 and AF2 students received 90% of the same curriculum. Sometimes, the elective classes were taught at the same time. However, the most important thing was the assignments given to them by their instructors. According to Goryeo, life in an affiliated school wasn't as simple as it was in other schools. The assignments you received from your instructors might be to kill someone or do something highly dangerous. But you don't have to worry too much. Instructor Gwon may be extreme sometimes, but he's very reliable when it comes to assignments. He also pays you well, Goryeo explained. The students of AF1 and AF2 did not have to pay tuition fees. Instead, they would receive some living expenses from the school. Basically, the students of AF1 and AF2 got their money from two different sources. One was provided by the school, and the other was provided by their tutors. Different instructors would receive different amounts of money. Some would receive more, some less. Of course, it was also related to the person assigned to the school. If the assignment was done well, the instructor would be happy, and the student would receive a huge sum of money. If the assignment wasn't done well, then sorry, but the instructor wouldn't deduct the student's salary. Goryeo brought Silin to AF1 and arranged his accommodation. The seniors and juniors didn't live in the same dormitory area, and their accommodations were randomly assigned to them. It was a single apartment, but it was twice the size of a single apartment at 7 Lights. It looked pretty good. Goryeo looked at the time and said to Silin, "Let's go to Instructor Gwon's." "Didn't you say you're treating us?" "Yeah." Goryeo smiled a little reluctantly. Instructor Gwon always treats us at his house, and the old man himself cooks. Chapter 247. Silin didn't know why Goryeo's expression was so awkward every time he mentioned Guanfeng's treat, but Goryeo didn't explain. He simply said, "You'll know when the time comes." It was Goryeo's first time at AF1, so he was showing Silin the way around. Normally, when he was really busy, he would have to go to 3 places: the apartment, the school building, and the training field. Therefore, he had to be familiar with these 3 places. Although we're all under Teacher Gwon's tutelage, he usually doesn't spend too much time teaching us. We have to submit a summary report every once in a while about our studies and work. It's a different story if we're on a mission. Don't think that it's easy to write a summary report. Teacher Gwon didn't ask for a word count, but there are still some things you need to pay attention to. On the way to Guanfeng's residence, Goryeo explained to Silin about his daily work and Guanfeng's requirements. The biggest difference between this place and 7 Lights was the freedom and standards. At AF1, the instructors wouldn't spend a lot of time teaching you what to do and what not to do. They only taught you skills, and it was up to you how much you could learn from them. The courses they chose were all taught by the people of the Royal Academy of Sciences, and the only thing that mattered was the different requirements and standards of the instructors. Everyone in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire knew that Guanfeng's standards were very high. But compared to Guanfeng's high standards, Guanfeng treated his disciples pretty well. If they needed flying cars, aircrafts, and so on, they could ask Guanfeng to pick them up directly. It would be a waste not to use them. Guanfeng wasn't stingy when it came to paying his students either. His salary was among the top 5 in both AF1 and AF2. Therefore, he didn't have to worry about his daily expenses even if he wasn't on a mission. In fact, Guanfeng didn't really control his students too much. To put it bluntly, even if his students committed murder or arson, they were fine as long as they met Guanfeng's requirements. For example, Guanfeng's minimum training target was 99%. As long as they could reach this target, Guanfeng wouldn't have any objections even if they committed murder or arson. This was also the reason why Guanfeng was so mysterious. Before Silin, the students under Guanfeng's tutelage who hadn't officially graduated from AF1 were his senior brother Pastura and senior sister Fu Qingqing. They belonged to the two main armies of the empire, and Goryeo belonged to the wing of the two armies. However, Guanfeng didn't care if the three of them had a conflict in private. Guanfeng wouldn't care even if Silin joined the rebel army in the future. Teachers like Guanfeng had their own residential area outside the three affiliated schools. Goryeo brought Silin to Guanfeng's residence. Guanfeng's house had a classical style to it. There was a small courtyard outside that was filled with flowers and plants. It looked pretty cozy. However, the two people sitting in the living room made the cozy house feel a few degrees colder after they entered. There were two people sitting on the sofa in the living room, senior brother Pastura and senior sister Fu Qingqing. Both of them had a stern look on their faces. Honestly speaking, they would have attracted a lot of men and women if they looked a little gentler, but not only were they wearing stern looks, they didn't look good at all. Their auras were so strong that no one dared to say anything even if they wanted to liven up the atmosphere. Pastura and Fu Qingqing turned around at the same time when they saw Silin walk in. They shot Silin a displeased look before nodding at Goryeo. Then, they returned their attention to the RAS academician's recent speeches on the big screen. Goryeo was obviously used to this kind of situation. He motioned for Silin not to worry and went to the kitchen to check on the situation. Goryeo returned just as Silin sat down. I just reported to Teacher Guan. He's cooking right now. And so, all four of Guanfeng's students sat on the long, big sofa in the living room and watched the academician's speech. The atmosphere was pretty strange. Silin felt that Pastura and Fu Qingqing were obviously hostile towards him. Or more accurately, it was resentment. Was it really like Goryeo said? Guanfeng was the only one who allowed Silin to use the PTSK. Pastura and Fu Qingqing weren't the only ones who looked like Goryeo's mouth had stiffened after he came in. Silin didn't say anything when he saw that none of them were planning to say anything. He simply watched the speech with them. Hui Mao obediently squatted on the sofa to show his politeness. No one objected when he jumped onto the sofa. 5 minutes later, Hui Mao was itching all over his body. His gaze subconsciously drifted towards the big fish tank on the other side of the living room. The fish in there are so fat. Hui Mao's paws itched when he saw how much they were swimming. Hui Mao glanced at Silin and moved his butt backward again and again. Meow meow, I'm not going to keep you guys company anymore. He ran to the big fish tank like a wisp of smoke, jumped onto it and crouched at the edge of the bathtub. The four people on the sofa had been paying attention to Hui Mao when Hui Mao jumped into the fish tank. They didn't stop the cat from jumping onto the fish tank for different reasons. There was a unique vent above the fish tank, allowing the fragrance of flowers and grass from the courtyard outside to enter along with the wind. It smelled very comfortable. The gray cat crouched at the edge of the fish tank and watched the fish inside. It felt like it was going to sleep as it felt the warm light shining in from outside the window and basking in the gentle breeze. It closed its eyes and felt sleepy. Pop! One of the fish seemed to be a bit hostile towards the animal's appearance. It jumped out of the water and spat out a pillar of water. The hair on Hui Mao's head was wet from the water the fish spat out. Silin understood now. No wonder Goryeo and the others didn't stop him. They just wanted to see Hui Mao suffer. The fish raised its head, and when the other fish saw what its companion was doing, they too jumped up and sprayed water at the gray cat. Hui Mao was drowsy and didn't notice when the first fish sprayed water, but he was much more awake now that he was sprayed. It wasn't easy for the men behind him to spray him, but there were too many of them. Hui Mao couldn't avoid being sprayed no matter how he jumped around. These fish sprayed water very quickly and moved very quickly. They were very agile. They weren't just good-looking. The wind grew a little stronger, and Wheeze's warmth was taken away by the sun's rays. It flicked away the water droplets on its ears and wagged its tail. Based on Silen's understanding of Wheeze, he knew that it must have come up with some wicked idea again. As expected, Huimao found an angle in the next moment and raised his tail, ignoring the fish spraying at him. Piss against the wind. Pitter-patter-patter, Silen, Goryo, Fuqingqing, and Pastura. Can you be any more embarrassing than this? Silen really wanted to stuff the cat into a crack in the ground. What kind of cat would pee on a tank full of fish in a situation like this? Guanfeng walked out with a plate in his hands and saw his 4 students staring at the fat cat acting like a hooligan to a tank full of fish. He had to admit that the fish had become a lot more docile after Huimao had peed on the fish tank. They didn't jump up and spray water anymore. Silen guessed that they were too busy vomiting. Guanfeng put down the plate and went back to the kitchen without saying anything. Silen coughed once to remind the fat cat to mind its place. Huimao understood Silen's meaning and shook off the water droplets on its body. Then, it ran to the dryer to dry its fur and lay down next to Silen. It licked its fur, looked at Silen, and then at the fur on its back. What it meant was, "Come on, let's stroke it." Silen thinks, this cat is getting more and more insatiable. It didn't take long for Guanfeng to bring out all the dishes on the table. Silen suddenly understood why everyone looked like they were on their way to the execution ground when he saw the dishes on the table. Color, fragrance, and taste. At the very least, color and fragrance had nothing to do with each other. As for taste, Silen could tell from Goryo and the other two's expressions that taste might not necessarily be better than color and fragrance. The 4 of them sat down around the table with a plate in front of them. Then, Guanfeng added a spoonful of something muddy onto each of their plates. Silen glanced at Goryo and asked with his eyes, "What the hell is this shit green mud?" Goryo shot Silen a look that said, "Good luck to you." Then, he lowered his eyes and let Guanfeng add food onto their plates just like Pastura and Fuqingqing. Aside from Silen and the other 3, Huimao's seat was also on the table. The food on his plate was exactly the same as Silen and the other 3's. Huimao crouched on his elevated seat and stared at the pile of food on his plate. He glanced at Silen and the others, and when he saw that no one was eating, he resisted the urge to stick out his tongue and lick the food. When he was finally done refilling everyone's plates, Guanfeng sat down and clapped his hands. "Alright, Silen is our new member today. It's been a long time since we last met up." Goryo, Pastura, and Fuqingqing curled their lips inwardly. "We met 30 days ago." Even the other instructors wouldn't complain if they didn't meet for a few hundred days. "Alright, let's cut to the chase. Let's begin. This is the first time you've eaten my cooking, Silen, so enjoy it. This is a nutritious meal, not something the trash you can buy outside can compare to." Guanfeng took the lead and started eating with his spoon. Goryo and the others sucked in a deep breath and started eating as well. Pastura's face was ashen as he mechanically put the spoon into his mouth. The veins on Fuqingqing's forehead bulged, but her face remained expressionless. They had experienced what Silen was feeling the moment he took his first spoon. It really wasn't something the junk food sold outside could compare to. At the very least, junk food could stimulate one's appetite, but these nutritious meals of love made one seriously nauseous. Silen endured the discomfort. He had to adapt to it since Goryo and the others had gotten used to it. Then, under self-hypnosis, Silen put the spoon into his mouth mechanically just like Pastura and the others. They screamed in their heads, "It's not that we don't want to eat, it's that our intestines are rejecting it." As for Huimao, he was eating with gusto. "Instructor Guanfeng, this is the best lunch I've ever had." Cough, cough, cough. Goryo, who was choking, could no longer care about the bitter gourd juice in his cup. He poured the juice into his mouth with a twisted expression. Pastura choked, and Fuqingqing's eyes widened in disbelief. "Delicious. The best? Are you kidding me? Are you sure you're not just flattering me to cover up the mistake you made with that tank of Ziyu? After confirming that Hui Mao wasn't joking, Guan Feng chuckled. Whis really knows what's good and what's good. Unlike those 4 brats, they're as blind as a bat. That's right. Hui Mao nodded in agreement. That's right. Guan Feng didn't like to talk during meals, and neither did Goryo and the others. It was because they didn't want their numb swallowing process to be interrupted. Silen felt like he had fought a tough battle when he finally finished the meal. However, Silen realized that Guan Feng was telling the truth through his body's absorption of the food. These nutritious meals were very beneficial to the human body. One would only realize it after eating them. Pastura and Fu Qingqing looked a lot better after the meal. They didn't look as resentful as before when they looked at Silen. Silen finally understood that he wasn't the main reason for their attitude earlier. Guan Feng chatted with the 4 of them for a while, and Pastura, Fu Qingqing, and Goryo also gave him a report on their recent training and some of the problems they ran into during their training. They wouldn't talk about their personal matters here because Guan Feng said that he wasn't going to interfere with them. He wouldn't interfere even if the Imperial Guard and the United Garrison Army started fighting each other. Silen listened to their reporting methods and key points. He would have to report to Guan Feng like this next time. Not bad. Guan Feng wasn't stingy with his praise. Ask them if you have any questions, Silen. Come to me if you really can't figure them out. Goryo has told you everything you need to pay attention to, right? I won't repeat them. You should familiarize yourself with them first. Guan Feng left and went upstairs after saying this. Where are you going, Teacher Guan? Silen asked after Guan Feng went upstairs. Taking a nap. Goryo and Fu Qingqing were the ones who did most of the talking. Pastura was the one who said the least, and his face was still expressionless. After talking for a while, they dispersed and went their separate ways. Don't you need to tell Teacher Guan? Silen asked. You'll get shot if you interrupt his afternoon nap for something like this, Goryo said confidently. Do you need to clean that up? Silen pointed at the fish tank Hui Mao had pissed on. No, I'll get a new one tomorrow. Alright, Silen didn't ask any more questions. There was no reason for him to care if Hui Mao didn't care. He grabbed Hui Mao and boarded Goryo's flying car. Pastura and Fu Qingqing had already left, so Goryo sent Silen back to his apartment. Before he left, he said to Silen, don't forget to ask for a flying car from Teacher Guan. It'll be easier to move around the planet. Don't worry, Teacher Guan has plenty of them. Silen thanked him and prepared to take a good rest. But the doorbell rang not long after he laid down. Silen looked at the image displayed on the monitor and opened the door. There were 3 people standing outside the door, Zhen Xingming, Zhen Xingyao, and a slightly older man who looked somewhat similar to the first 2. He was probably Zhen Xingming's older brother, Zhen Xingchen, who had been raised as the heir to the throne since young. Compared to Zhen Xingyao's calm demeanor, Zhen Xingchen had more of the dignified air of a ruler. Even though he hadn't officially inherited the throne yet, just standing there quietly was enough to make people feel pressured. Silen wasn't surprised that they knew his apartment and his route so quickly. They wouldn't have timed him so precisely otherwise. They were royalty after all. Silen would have suspected that the Zhen family had declined if they didn't even have this much ability. Come in first. Celine invited the 3 of them in. There were still some Zhen family members hiding in the shadows, but they had no intention of following them in. Zhen Xingchen wouldn't let them in either. Zhen Xingchen didn't want even his most loyal subordinates to know about the Zhen family's internal affairs. Hui Mao was lying on his bed with his eyes closed. He looked like he was asleep, but the twitching of his ears every now and then showed that he knew everything that was going on in the living room. We just moved in today, so we don't have much to entertain you with. Silen pulled out a chair and sat down in front of the trio. If that's the case, then let's get straight to the point, Zhen Xingchen said. Zhen Xingming and Zhen Xingyao didn't interrupt too much since Zhen Xingchen was here. Jen Xingqian paused for a moment before turning to Jen Xingming. You go into the room first. Why? Jen Xingming was about to voice his opinion when Jen Xingqian glared at him. He swallowed his words and murmured, second brother is here too, so you just kicked me out, Xingyao, go in as well, Jen Xingqian said. Jen Xingyao clenched his fists tightly and narrowed his eyes at Jen Xingming. Jen Xingming curled his lips and walked into the bedroom. Although he was unwilling, Jen Xingyao still followed him into the bedroom. Do you want to talk in the study? Silan asked. No need. Jen Xingqian stared at Silan carefully, but he really couldn't find any resemblance between him and a member of the Jen family. Therefore, he moved his gaze to Silan's left thumb and said, I want to see the Fuji tattoo on your hand. Silan took off his glove and stuck out his thumb with the leaf pattern so that Jen Xingqian could observe it better. In truth, Silan was also puzzled. Why wasn't the ring reacting? Even in front of the future king of estimation. It wasn't as if Silan hadn't suspected that Genya had fallen into a trap back then, but when he thought about it, Genya had never complained about anything. In fact, he often expressed his longing for his hometown. Genya's final words to Silan didn't sound like the Gen family harbored any ill will towards Genya. In fact, Genya only wanted to return to the Gen family. After some thought, Silan finally decided to show the leaf pattern to Jen Xingyao and the others. This way, things could progress a little. It really is the real Fuji pattern. Jen Xingqian showed a leaf pattern on his wrist to Silan as well. The leaf pattern on Jen Xingqian's wrist was very similar to the one on Silan's thumb, but there were still some differences. It was as if there were no two leaves in the world that were exactly the same. Those who possess the Fuji pattern are all people closely related to King Fuji. For example, me, Xingming, and Xingyao because our father is King Fuji. But what about you? Who are you? Silan shook his head. I promised someone that I wouldn't tell them the reason or the original owner of this Fuji pattern before the ring gives me a hint. Jen Xingqian wasn't surprised. He had already expected this. As far as I know, only my grandfather's generation had a Fuji pattern like yours, and my grandfather was that generation's King Fuji. Chapter 248. Silan didn't comment on Jen Xingqian's claim. He simply kept quiet, neither denying nor confirming it. No one could be sure of this. If Jen Xingqian's claim was true, then this matter was related to the generation before him. The only way Jen Xingqian could get to the bottom of this was to ask his grandfather, the previous King Fuji. However, his grandfather hadn't been involved in politics for many years now. He only showed up once or twice a year to ask about the younger generation. Even though Jen Xingqian was the next heir to King Fuji's throne and the one who spoke the most to him among the younger generation, this most was limited to 10 sentences. Therefore, Jen Xingqian didn't know much about the matters of that generation. This time, after Jen Xingyao and Jen Xingming told Jen Xingqian about Silan, Jen Xingqian showed up in person. He didn't alert his father or anyone else in the Jen family. Jen Xingqian didn't get much useful information from Silan since he walked through the door, but he was still very polite. However, if the Fuji tattoo on Silan's hand wasn't the same as his grandfather's, then Jen Xingqian's attitude towards Silan would have been different. If he was the same generation as Silan, he might have forced Silan to tell him more information even if Silan was Guan Feng's student. At the same time, at Guan Feng's residence. Inside the living room, Guan Feng was sitting on the sofa with a serious expression on his face. It was the complete opposite of his usual genteel and gentlemanly persona. In fact, he looked very similar to Pastura right now. There were 3 people sitting on the guest seats opposite Guan Feng, and one of them had a bullet hole in his collar. The trio exchanged glances with each other to see who would speak first. After all, it wasn't a good idea to wake up Guan Feng from his afternoon nap. Ahem. The leftmost person was probably the one with the highest position among the trio, so he was the one who spoke first. Guan Feng, we know your habits. We wouldn't have bothered you if we weren't pressed for time. Guan Feng looked at him with the same cold expression. Spit it out if you have something to say. If the students outside heard Guan Feng's words, their jaws would definitely drop to the ground. Who would have thought that Guan Feng would actually swear? You're done venting your anger. Look, you almost cut off my neck. The man in the middle said. Guan Feng raised an eyebrow. I know it's you. Why else do you think your neck is still intact? Seeing that Guan Feng was clearly losing his patience, the leftmost man finally revealed the purpose of their visit after the other two signaled with their eyes. Do you know about sea blue gold? The man asked. Sea blue gold was a type of alloy. It was also the main building material for deep-sea probes and submarines so far. However, the proportions of various alloys and the types of some ultramicro elements in sea blue gold were not fixed. The relevant researchers had been doing research to upgrade the alloy formula of sea blue gold. I don't want to waste my breath, Guan Feng said expressionlessly. Although he wasn't one of the researchers, he knew a lot of things about it. All right. The man took out an electronic file and passed it to Guan Feng. He explained, this is an image and analysis table we received a while ago. The sea blue gold mentioned in it is better than the sea blue gold we're using right now. This means that the sea blue gold formula used in this probe is more advanced than the one we're using right now. Guan Feng looked at the explanation on the electronic file before turning to the trio and saying disdainfully, not even the academicians of the RAS could come up with a better formula than this? No. The trio felt ashamed when they heard this. Although there were very few people who specialized in sea blue gold, it was true that they couldn't come up with a better formula than this one. That being said, they were motivated when they thought of the formula. You know that the Abyss project has reached a critical stage, but we ran into a bottleneck a few days ago. If we have this upgraded sea blue gold, we'll be able to overcome it very quickly. Guan Feng tossed the electronic file back and smacked his forehead. He knew about the Abyss project. It was one of the top 10 projects of the RAS right now. A few days ago, he heard that the Abyss project had run into a problem that they couldn't solve until now. Now that they had found a way to solve it, it was no wonder that they were in such a hurry and interrupted Guan Feng's lunch break to explain it to him. However, what does this have to do with me? I'm not a member of the Abyss project. Guan Feng said while crossing his legs on the sofa. The man rubbed his hands together. The person with the upgraded sea blue gold formula is in the 19th star region of the Empire. We tried to contact him from afar, but the situation over there is pretty complicated. That's why we're going to send someone to talk to him face to face. We can let him enter the RAS, skip the honorary scholar title and become an academician straight away. We'll send someone to talk to him, but we'll need an escort. Guan Feng cut him off before he could finish. Get lost. My student isn't a bodyguard, and he doesn't have the time or energy to be your bodyguard. Sigh, they count as bodyguards. We have the military escorting them, but it's better to take some of the RAS' own people with us. We've already transferred some students from AF1 and AF2, and you, Guan Feng, are our top priority. Everyone's hoping that you'll send a student to join us. He was the vice dean of the RAS, so he couldn't fly into a rage even if he was told to get lost. There was no helping it. He'd promised those people that he would get a student from Guan Feng. Guan Feng was very popular. After all, he was famous, and every single one of his students was being fought over by all parties. Pistura, Fu Qingqing, and Goryeo had all been booked by 3 parties before they even graduated. It was obvious how popular they were. This meant that although the Abyss project team was the one who proposed this, the higher-ups of the RAS had taken the opportunity to recruit some of their students and warm up the project in advance. They had transferred some of their students from several famous teachers to cultivate their relationship with the RAS. This way, even if these students left the affiliated schools and joined other forces in the future, they would still be connected to the RAS to a certain extent. They wouldn't just be tied to their courses and education. Although the people of the RAS tended to be arrogant most of the time, they couldn't pretend to be aloof and virtuous. It was something that even the higher-ups understood. Guan Feng was without a doubt a delicious cake in everyone's eyes. He was an imperial tutor and the leader of the firearms engineering project. Every one of his students was a famous figure. Even Pastura, Fu Qingqing, and Goryeo, who were still young and inexperienced, would be known by everyone in the empire in a few years' time. Guan Feng waved a hand. They're all busy with something. That's because I heard that you accepted a new student. The new student doesn't have any other missions, and the new course hasn't started yet. A lot of people knew about Guan Feng's new student, and they'd been eyeing him ever since. No way. I haven't even warmed my hands yet, and you're already dragging me away. How can there be such a good deal in the world? The trio's eyes lit up when they heard Guan Feng's words. It wasn't a forceful rejection, which meant that there was still room for negotiation. Silen didn't know what his new teacher had discussed with the others, and he hadn't made much progress in his conversation with Zhen Xingchen either. Both sides were holding back and not revealing too much. Zhen Xingchen moved his fingers and looked at Silen. When will the Fuji tattoo on your finger give you a notification? I'm not sure myself. I thought it would when I saw you guys, but unfortunately, it didn't. It was why Silen had shown up in front of them. Since that's the case, I can only go and ask Grandpa first. However, Zhen Xingchen stared straight at Silen and said solemnly, I hope you can keep this a secret before I figure out what's going on. Of course, I understand. Zhen Xingchen looked at the time, stood up and said to Silen, since we've finally met, let's have a meal together. Silen couldn't refuse the future King Fuji's request, so he was about to agree when his communicator rang. After looking at the display, Silen apologized to Zhen Xingchen and went to his study to answer the call. What's wrong? Weren't you taking an afternoon nap? Silen asked while looking at Guan Feng's image. I was woken up by someone. Guan Feng's expression had returned to his usual one. Pack your things, I have a mission for you. I'll tell the school about your curriculum, so come to my place after you're done. I'll give you 2 hours. All right. After the call was over, Silen walked out of his study and said to Zhen Xingchen, I'm sorry, but there's been a change of plans. I've been summoned by Teacher Guan for a mission. I won't force you to do it since it's a mission Teacher Guan gave you. Do your best. Zhen Xingchen didn't mind at all. It was a good opportunity to ask his grandfather if he had any brothers or sisters back in the day while Silen was away on a mission. Zhen Xingming and Zhen Xingyao didn't manage to pry any useful information out of Weeza's mouth no matter how hard they tried. When Zhen Xingchen called them out of the room, both of them were filled with questions, and they were hoping that Zhen Xingchen would answer them. However, Zhen Xingchen dragged them away without saying a word. He's going to Fox Guan's place again. Hui Mao wagged his tail. Are you sure he's not trying to avenge his fish? You're overthinking things. Silen dragged Hui Mao out of the house. He didn't have a flying car yet, so he could only take AF1's loop line train. When Silen arrived at Guan Feng's house, the man was bending over and pruning his flowering tree in the yard. He looked to be in a good mood. You're here. Guan Feng said while cutting a branch with a pair of shears. There's a document on the living room table. Take a look first. Silen came to the living room and read through the document. He had a general idea of the mission this time. Are you done? Guan Feng walked into the room and tossed another electronic file to Silen. This is the highest grade C blue-gold formula the RAS is currently using. Memorize it, and once you're there, confirm the authenticity of the formula the old geezers told you. If it's really C blue-gold, get them a new formula. Silen nodded and asked, what do we get out of this mission? Guan Feng could have turned down the offer if he wanted to, but he accepted it anyway. Guan Feng held up 2 fingers. See blue gold. I'll be able to develop Purgatory Thunder Snake S with these 2 items. Purgatory Thunder Snake S. Yeah, I was just imagining it before, but now it's time to give it a try. Guan Feng tossed an imperial debit card to Silen. I've paid you half of your salary in advance. The other half will be given to you along with the mission rewards. Silen swiped the debit card on a special card slot next to the communicator and stared at the amount displayed on it. Weeza's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Goryo was right. Guan Feng wasn't stingy with his students. Silen put away the card, and Guan Feng tossed a box to Silen. Inside were some emergency medicine and compressed food that couldn't be bought outside. Some of them were distributed internally, and some were made by Guan Feng himself. If he really sold them, they'd be worth a lot of money. After explaining the medicine and food to Silen, Guan Feng added, "The RAS has a special signal network. You can contact me through the communicator as long as you're not in a severely disrupted area or isolated area." Understood. Amen. If there's nothing else, you can wait in the yard. A flying car will come to pick you up in a bit. Oh right, I don't really care about my students, but there's one thing I must emphasize. I'm all ears. Students of different instructors participate in every mission, so it's inevitable that there will be some friction between students. But don't embarrass me. Understood. Guan Feng's meaning was clear to Silen. To put it simply, he could fight, but he couldn't lose. After that, Guan Feng closed the door and left Silen in the yard to wait for a car. As expected, a flying car came to pick up Silen before long. It was an autopilot car, and it took Silen to a port. Chapter 249. Everything had been arranged, so all Silen needed to do was to move his feet. The rendezvous point wasn't on this planet, but on an inconspicuous satellite planet. We haven't been here for long, and we're already going on a long journey. We don't even have time to rest, Hui Mao muttered. He was planning to greet Bonner and King Kong, but he was sent away again as soon as he landed. Didn't Chang San and Chang Si say that students should prioritize their studies? Why did the affiliated schools not fit this rule at all? Silen scratched Hui Mao's chin. It's not a bad idea. At least it'll give everyone some time to prepare. The capital star region is the absolute territory of the Emperor and 3 kings. We won't be able to escape if there's an unavoidable conflict. Hui Mao flicked his ears. Silen, what's your relationship with the Zhen family? I've checked and confirmed that you're not related by blood. Why do they keep coming to you? It's a long story. This was the only word Silen could use to sum it up. Alright, let's not talk about it if it's too long. Hui Mao narrowed his eyes and started dozing off. The satellite planet was smaller than the preparatory campus planet, but judging from the buildings and facilities, the importance of this planet was no less than that of the preparatory planet. The spaceplane landed next to a tall cylindrical building. This building was the rendezvous point Silen was heading to. Silen handed over the student ID Guan Feng had given him for inspection, and the door opened for Silen and Hui Mao to enter. The interior of the building was a very simple metallic color. It wasn't too dazzling, but Silen could sense that there were martial equipment embedded inside the walls, ready to deal with any intruders at any moment. There was a logo on every door, but it wasn't the logo of any of the 3 affiliated schools. It was the logo of the RAS. This meant that the owner of this building was a member of the RAS. An intelligent, mechanized building, powerful equipment, and sophisticated scanning system. This place isn't bad, Hui Mao commented. Silen flicked the restless guy on his shoulder and took the elevator to a conference room on the 10th floor. He waved his student ID in front of the scanning hole, and the door of the conference room opened. The first thing he saw was a dozen or so people seated around the round table. Like Silen, there were students from AF1 and AF2 who had been invited to attend the event. There were also people wearing the emblem of the RAS. Oh, you're here, Silen. Come, have a seat. You came just in time. We were just about to start, a member of the RAS said to Silen with a smile. Silen nodded politely and sat down on an empty chair. The person who was sleeping next to him rubbed his hair and glanced at Silen, who sat down beside him. You're here too. The student who had just woken up was Wally, his roommate in the temporary dormitory. Wally was kicked over by the teacher, who was still righteous even though he was in debt to do some preschool training. Wally was very reluctant about it, and putting aside how lazy he was, Wally's goal for coming here was different from most people. He did not seek wealth and glory, only food and clothing, nor did he seek to accumulate battle achievements. All he wanted was a peaceful life. Even if he had to listen to those old pedants spitting spittle all over the place, talking passionately about things that most students found unfathomable but couldn't understand with a glance, Wally did not want to run here and there, not to mention he had to leave the academy to complete a dispatch mission. If it wasn't for the old man's generous salary, Wally wouldn't have moved a single step. He arrived rather early, but he didn't know anyone in the conference room. Most of them were former students. Other than listening to them show off their glorious deeds and gossip about the teachers and famous students of the affiliated schools, he could only listen to the academicians talking about the mysterious things they were talking about. In Wally's opinion, the teachers' gossip and the academicians' profound academic topics were all hypnotic. Wally didn't participate in the discussion when he heard that he had to wait for someone else. He lay down on the table and fell asleep. He didn't expect to see an acquaintance sitting next to him when he woke up. This was good news for Wally. If he didn't know anyone, he might have slept through the entire mission. Sillin was also happy to see Wally. "Yeah, it's a mission from my teacher. I didn't think I'd be assigned a mission before I even found my footing." Wally rubbed his face to wake himself up. The conference officially began after Sillin sat down. The organizer first explained the mission. It wasn't difficult, but it wasn't complicated either. Everyone knew about it before they came. The organizer also introduced the students who were invited. Sillin had heard from Guan Feng about the secrets hidden in this mission before he came. Since this mission was initiated by the RAS and not by any noble of the empire, the emperor, the three kings, or the two armies, all the invited students had one thing in common, and that was that their path of development hadn't been decided yet. They hadn't joined any force or noble yet. To put it nicely, it was because the RAS valued these people and wanted to avoid arousing suspicion by not involving themselves with other forces. To put it bluntly, even if the invited students died a heroic death, the organizer wouldn't need to waste time explaining things to the various forces. Many of the invited students' teachers had direct connections with the RAS, so the entire mission was an internal matter of the RAS. They could resolve their internal conflicts themselves. There were 10 invited students, and they would be escorted by a few academicians and honorary scholars of the RAS. As for the other guards, they weren't going to use the Imperial Army, but the RAS' own guards. There weren't many of them, but they were strong. After all, many of them had stayed behind from the affiliated schools. After a brief introduction of the mission, the leader told everyone to get ready to depart. It looked like the RAS was in a hurry for this mission. The RAS's starship had a large RAS emblem on it, and it enjoyed the same special flight routes and jump points as the nobles. It had to be said that the RAS was rich, that much could be seen from the starship's internal configuration and decorations. The 10 students had an activity floor on the starship that belonged solely to them. The lounge for the 10 of them was also on this floor. At the entertainment area at the center of the floor, Sillin and Wally were sitting on armchairs and enjoying the fruit juices and snacks served to them by the robots. Alcohol was not allowed in this place, and it was said that there was an incident in the past where a student went crazy after drinking and caused huge losses. Therefore, if you were a heavy drinker, but you didn't go crazy after drinking, you should show your instructor's certificate of approval, sign a letter of guarantee, and get the signature of the highest-ranking officer of the starship. Only then would you be allowed to drink. Although Sillin and Wally really wanted to drink, they found it more troublesome. They also had to endure the RAS's academicians and honorary scholars' scolding and health education. Alcohol has different effects on the central nervous system. It affects acetylcholine, neuropeptides, and corticotropin release factors too, blah 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 blah, to those academicians and honorary scholars who were used to thinking from an academic point of view. Wally wished he could take off his shoes and stuff them into their mouths. This was the common point of view shared by him and his extremely scoundrelly mentor, who was in debt as it should be. Not far away, Hui Mao was playing a game with York, a former cadet. Hui Mao, who had once been looked down upon by the Miantuan and put in a lot of effort in this area, was able to win 2 out of 3 games against York. York was quite dissatisfied with this result, and kept dragging Hui Mao to the other side. That was why Silen and Wally simply sat here and chatted as they watched. Silen and Wally were chatting when a sweet voice interrupted them. "Your teacher Guan Feng's new student." Silen looked up. It was the girl named Kenasenza. She was a year older than Silen and the others, and she had a gentle and pleasant appearance. Her long dress was very eye-catching among the 10. During the meeting, the organizer had introduced everyone's names, but didn't mention which teacher they belonged to. Silen wasn't surprised that Kenasenza was able to tell the truth. After all, many former cadets knew that he had the Purgatory Thunder Snake K during the selection test. When he saw Kenasenza coming over, Wally winked at Silen and moved his butt of his own accord to give up the seat next to him for Kenasenza. Kenasenza thanked Wally and sat down, staring at Silen with wide, curious eyes. Silen nodded in response to Kenasenza's question. "Yes, my teacher is Guan Feng." Kenasenza was very happy to receive Silen's confirmation. She turned around and shouted at the people sitting on the other side of the entertainment hall, "Eros, Vino, Dadwa, he really is teacher Guan Feng's student." The 3 people sitting on the other side saw this and stood up to walk over. The big guy, Eros, looked a little embarrassed. After hearing Kenasenza's words, he scratched his head and said a little bashfully, "Oh. Hee hee." Vino and Dadwa looked at Silen with probing and doubtful eyes. The others sitting in the other corner of the entertainment hall also looked over with a look of anticipation. In fact, the moment Silen entered the meeting room, he knew that some of the people here were full of hostility towards him. They weren't looking at Silen with jealousy, but they weren't friendly either. Guan Feng seemed to have known that this would happen, which was why he said those words to Silen. Seeing that things didn't seem to be going as he imagined, Wally looked at Silen and asked if he needed help. Silen shook his head imperceptibly, indicating that he could handle it himself. "This is Vino, Dadwa, and the big guy, Eros. As for me, do you know my name?" Kenasenza asked Silen with a smile. Her eyes were curved and shining. "I've introduced you guys in the meeting before." "I know you, Kenasenza," Silen answered. Kenasenza waved a finger playfully. "It's fate that we've gotten to know each other during this mission, so there's no need to be so distant. You guys can call me Kiki like Dadwa does." Dadwa was the only female among the 10 people here except for Kenasenza. The other 8 were all men. Dadwa's style was completely different from Kenasenza's. She was lively, active, and got along well with the others. She might look careless, but she had her own principles. This was what Silen had learned over the past few days. Vino walked up to Silen and looked down at Silen from above. Then, he pulled out a chair and sat down. He raised his chin and said, "I know teacher Guan Feng. His Purgatory Thunder Snake is very famous. In other words, the reason I know you is because your teacher is Guan Feng, not because you're amazing." Many people in the affiliated school had heard of Guan Feng's fame and seen him before. After all, Guan Feng had taught some classes here before. Every time Guan Feng's classes had a limited number of slots, and every time, they were filled up almost instantly. The moment the class started, the students who had been waiting for a long time on the in-school platform would fight for the slots with all their might. This showed just how famous Guan Feng was. However, that was only on the surface. Silen didn't mind Vino's words at all. He didn't refute them, and he didn't say anything either. Vino and Dadwa exchanged a glance with each other when they saw that Silen wasn't going to fight back. Then, they smiled mockingly. "I heard that all of teacher Guan Feng's students are very good at shooting." "I agree with that. Although I haven't seen your 3+1 test with my own eyes, I've heard a bit about it from my senior brothers." However, Vino looked like he had seen through Qin Lai's intentions. He paused for a moment before continuing, I wonder if you people who play with guns are only suited to shooting from afar and not fighting at close range? Vino and Dadwa moved at the same time as soon as he finished speaking. Dadwa was undoubtedly very fast, and Vino was a little closer to Silen. His desire to attack was so strong that people would unconsciously pay more attention to him if they were attacked at the same time. After all, Vino and Dadwa had been in the affiliated school for a longer time. Compared to the candidates who participated in the selection test a few days ago, Vino and Dadwa were undoubtedly more skillful. Their attacks were direct and swift. On one side was Kenisenza, on the other side of Silen, and behind him was a chair. In any case, it was a difficult problem for a pure marksman to face such a pincer attack. However, Silen wasn't a pure marksman. In fact, before Kenisenza arrived, Silen had already noticed the probing gazes from Vino and the others. Silen was wondering when they would make a move, but it turned out that Kenisenza, a girl who didn't have much combat power, was the first to draw Vino and Dadwa over. The two of them took the opportunity to get close to Silen and attack him at close range. However, as soon as Vino and Dadwa started to move, they quickly stopped and stiffly stood in their original positions. Vino's fingers were in the shape of claws, and his target was Silen's neck. Dadwa's fist was aimed at Silen's waist, but because of Silen's teleportation, they both deviated from the most suitable point of attack. Even so, they didn't have the intention to continue attacking. Apart from York, who was playing the game with Huimao, everyone else was looking at them with blank expressions. What was it that forced Vino and Dadwa to stop attacking? A knife and a gun. The thin long knife was pointed at Vino's eyebrows, and the Purgatory Thunder Snake K was pointed at Dadwa's head. The strange atmosphere in the surroundings affected York, who was playing the game with Huimao. He finally realized that the surroundings were a little too quiet, and he could only hear him and Huimao cursing each other in the game. York was distracted by the images around him, and Huimao decisively killed him with a single hit. Looking at the words that flashed on the screen, York was furious. He slammed the game table and roared, "Hey, what's wrong with you guys?" However, after seeing the situation on Silen's side, York was stunned. He poked Huimao, who was licking his claws proudly because he had won the game, and pointed at Silen. Huimao didn't even look at him. "Why do you care so much? No wonder you lost. This is called a lack of willpower." "Bullshit." Again. York didn't care about the others' reactions. He flexed his fingers and continued playing with Huimao. Huimao was very happy because they had gambled, and they had won at least 3 bags of fish biscuits in the past few rounds. This was a good harvest. It was rare to meet an idiot like York. If York knew that he was an idiot in Huimao's eyes, how would he feel? Silen held a sword and a pistol in one hand. No one could tell what he was thinking, but Vino and Dadwa were the ones who attacked first, so the others wouldn't blame Silen. The problem was that the people watching from afar didn't have any intention of stopping the fight. If Silen was an easy target, they might have tried to stop him because he was their senior, but now it seemed that Silen wasn't. They weren't his senior, and their relationship with Vino and Dadwa wasn't very good either. No one wanted to get into trouble. Therefore, they didn't do anything after their initial shock. Eros scratched his head again and looked at Kenisenza, indicating for her to mediate. After all, Kenisenza was a girl, so she was better than a big guy like him. Eros might make the situation worse if he went into the fray directly. Plus, it was common knowledge that Eros wasn't very good with words. Wally crossed his legs and slowly picked up a snack with his fingers, putting it into his mouth, ignoring the pitiful look Kenisenza was giving him. Kenisenza put down the teacup in her hand and smiled. As expected of Guan Feng's student. "I'm impressed. It's just a small fight. Silen, Vino and Dadwa are just curious about you. Let's leave it at that." Silen looked at Kenisenza and smiled. Kenisenza didn't know what Silen's smile meant, but she felt that Silen's eyes seemed to be able to see through her. Silen's hand shook, and the knife and gun disappeared. He picked up the cup and juice again. The people watching from afar said to their companions, "Is his teacher really Guan Feng? No wonder everyone fights to get a spot every time Guan Feng starts a class." Their companion nodded in agreement. As expected of a famous teacher. Look at how his student is this good even though he's just entered the school. No wonder Guan Feng accepted him. Although they worshipped Guan Feng in the past, it was mainly because of his purgatory thunder snake. Boys tended to pay more attention to guns, and the mysterious purgatory thunder snake was one of them. However, in their opinion, a melee fighter with a gun was nothing special. Today, however, Sillin had taught them a lesson. Who said that melee combat couldn't be done with guns? Looking at his movements, they couldn't even keep up with him. In the blink of an eye, he was stopped by the long saber. Even Dadwa couldn't match his speed, right? Sillin and the others might not know Dadwa's identity right now, but the seniors did. Dadwa shared the same teacher as Bi Yao, who was famous for his speed. This meant that Dadwa was also good at speed. However, even Dadwa couldn't get the upper hand against Sillin. They didn't know that even Dadwa's senior brother Bi Yao had been kicked by Sillin once, let alone Dadwa, who was slightly weaker than Bi Yao. Vino stared at Sillin for a while after Sillin put away his knife. Then, he smiled and said, "You're amazing. I admit defeat." Vino's words made Sillin look at him in a higher light. A person who could admit defeat so calmly did leave a better impression on him. Dadwa flicked her fingers and casually collapsed on a nearby recliner. She put her feet on the edge of the table and said, "As I thought, I'm still not good enough. No wonder my teacher said I'm lacking. Sigh, I'm under a lot of pressure compared to a new student like you. I wonder what my senior brother Bi Yao will do." Hui Mao tilted his ear to the side and said while moving his claws to control the game board, "Bi Yao? You mean the guy with Panther the Black Panther?" Hui Mao's words startled York. His hands trembled. Damn it, he lost again. Hui Mao skillfully raised his claws and scooped up the gambling money on the side. He counted it and then pushed it under his feet. There was already a stack of coins on his butt. York didn't care about the money he lost and jumped in front of Hui Mao to ask, "You know Bi Yao and Panther?" Hui Mao raised his eyes and looked at York, who was full of curiosity and astonishment. He raised his claws and moved them in front of York. Fuck. York rummaged in his pocket and took out a note with a large face value. He put it back and took out a smaller one and handed it to Hui Mao. Hui Mao looked at the note and then at York's pocket. He didn't take it and didn't say a word. Sillin was focused on drinking his juice. Wally curled his lips. After spending time together in the temporary dormitory, he already knew that this master and servant duo weren't good people. York shook the coins and said, "Hey, don't overdo it. Leave some leeway." Humph. Hui Mao raised his claws and took the coins and put them under his butt. He said slowly, "I know Panther the Black Panther, and we know Bi Yao too." Although Sillin told them not to make it too public, it was still okay to say their names, right? Hui Mao counted with his claws. There's also Zani with wings, Puno the silly-looking big guy, Inaf, and the one playing the music, what's her name again? Oh, Ling Shi. Now, the few of them were really stunned, and became even more silent. Black Panther, Bi Yao, Zani, Puno, and even Ling Shi were acquainted with Sillin. They were all characters who had been recruited by Wing in advance, and they could be considered celebrities in the affiliated schools. The people who could come into contact with them. Sillin had thought that they were all people of the same level who had no sides, but he had never imagined that he would be able to come into contact with them. Wally didn't gossip often. Other than Zani, who appeared during the selection test, he didn't know the other people Hui Mao was talking about. However, from the reactions of others, he could tell the roles these people played in the affiliated school. At the same time, he also noticed that when Hui Mao mentioned these names, he was obviously more indifferent than usual, as if he didn't think much of these people. To be able to make Hui Mao react like this. Ha, This master and servant really hid it well. Hui Mao ran back to Silen with the money in his mouth and asked Silen to help him save the money, including the principal that Silen had lent him. Silen didn't bother to settle it with him. Hui Mao squatted on Silen's shoulder and looked at Eros, who was standing next to him, and said, "Puno is bigger than you." This was just a statement from the cat's mouth, and it didn't mean any disdain. It was just a statement of fact. Back then, when Puno swelled up and transformed, he had also seen it. Compared to Eros, he was indeed much larger. Hee. Eros scratched his head in embarrassment. Hui Mao, don't mind him, Eros had always been like this. His catchphrase was, hee, ahaha, oh he. These 3 words were used according to the circumstances. To eliminate the awkwardness, Vino took the initiative to start a conversation and talked about Eros. Only now did they realize that Eros was actually Ironhead's senior brother. They were blood brothers, and they shared the same teacher. Finally, the awkwardness from before was eliminated. Wally also joined the conversation, and everyone got closer to each other. Silen wasn't a petty person. Just like Guan Feng said, it was inevitable that students would have some friction when they first met, but it would be fine after a fight. When they finally arrived at their destination, Silen, Vino, Dadwa, York, and Eros had become much more familiar with each other. However, York had suffered an even greater blow from Hui Mao. He wasn't good at games, and he still couldn't beat this fat cat in a fight. Every day, the cat's paw prints on York's face didn't disappear. Through this period of interaction, everyone knew that this fat cat was very familiar with the animals in AF1. It would be a lie to say that they weren't afraid. Everyone had some trauma from the selection test before they entered the school. After landing, Silen noticed that the buildings on this planet weren't tall. There weren't any tall skyscrapers, but every building was like a fortress built for battle. Walking among these buildings gave people the illusion that they were on a battlefield. Rumor had it that wars did break out here, but not between humans, but between humans and beasts. The ocean took up 3/5 of the planet, and the remaining 2/5 was made up of land. However, almost half of the land was made up of desert and other areas. There weren't many people living here, so the land with better conditions had become densely populated. Before this mission, Silen and the others had learned a bit about the general situation here, the conflict between humans and sea beasts, as well as the conflicts between humans. Cities were often attacked by sea beasts. Even if they had protective barriers, they wouldn't keep them up all the time. They didn't have enough energy resources to do so. Neither side was willing to give up their territory. Generations of struggle had become a habit. Humans' weapons were constantly upgrading, and marine species were constantly evolving. Maybe one day in the future, one side would finally win, and things would calm down for a while. If humans won, there would be even more intense internal conflicts after the peace. If the sea beasts won, the defeated humans might go down the road of destruction with their home, or they might leave this planet and find another to live on. However, they would always bear the mark of the defeated, and they would lose their home in the hands of the humans. The people here were very stubborn. This stubbornness was inherited from their ancestors. Otherwise, they wouldn't have stayed here to fight against the sea beasts by themselves. It was precisely because they realized the stubbornness of the people here that the RAS sent someone to negotiate. If it were someone from other places who was easier to talk to, they could have settled the matter through long-distance communication. Why would they need to come all the way from the capital? Many houses had various kinds of dried fish hanging in front of them, so the air was full of similar smells. For example, the fat cat on Silen's shoulder hadn't closed its mouth since it arrived. It was almost drooling. If it weren't for Silen telling it not to run around, it would have run off to look for food as soon as it landed. Wow, look at the teeth of that fish. York pointed at half a fish head hanging in front of a house. Although it was only half a fish head, it was enough to tell them a lot. The fish head was about 2 meters long, and there were rows of sharp teeth in its mouth. Its pharyngeal teeth were also very sharp. Even if it escaped from its mouth, it would be crushed by the pharyngeal teeth. York's exclamation made the RAS academicians feel very embarrassed. They glared at him, and York reluctantly retracted his finger that was about to personally feel the sharpness of the fish head's teeth. He winked at Vino and didn't say anything. The people from the RAS had already informed the planetary government of this planet before they came here. The planetary government had also sent someone to welcome them, but it wasn't a warm welcome. Compared to the welcoming attitude they received on other planets, the RAS could be said to have received a cold reception this time. The faces of two of the more arrogant academicians immediately darkened, but when they thought of the discussion they had before they left, they decided to put business first and endured it. Silen's senses were very sharp. He could sense that there were people pointing guns at them from the surrounding buildings. It wasn't that they considered Silen's group as enemies. They didn't have any killing intent, but it was just a habit. They were used to looking at people through the scope, and they were used to looking at people next to their guns. Perhaps this was the only way to make them feel safe, but they didn't have the slightest awareness of disrespect. They believed that the others could also sense that they were being pointed at by guns, but without any clear instructions, they just stayed on guard and didn't move. So this is what it feels like to walk under so many guns. Vino's lips twitched. The muscles on Arrow's face twitched, but he didn't reply. He didn't even use his usual three-word reply, which showed how nervous he was. It didn't feel good to be pointed at by guns and not be able to do anything. However, Wally seemed to be very used to things like this. He wasn't as tense as Vino and York. Compared to the others, Wally and Silen looked as casual as if they were taking a stroll on the streets. This made the others click their tongues in amazement. Maybe this is the difference. Dadwa thought. Other than Wally and Silen, there was another person who was also very relaxed, and that was Kenesenza. From their interactions over the past few days, Silen knew that although Kenesenza wasn't very strong, she had a natural ability to predict danger. Just like Tico's rabbit, she had a natural intuition for danger. Although those who knew Kenesenza's ability knew that she wouldn't be in danger, it was better to be safe than sorry. There was no backup for a life. If it was lost, it would be gone forever. So they would rather be more cautious than completely rely on Kenesenza. Suddenly, Kenesenza stopped in her tracks and frowned as she looked in a certain direction. Although Kenesenza had stopped, the entire team quickly went on high alert. "What's wrong, Coco?" an academician asked. Kenesenza shook her head. "It's nothing right now." In other words, there would be trouble later. Without the protection of the planetary government's army, the academicians didn't have much confidence in just their team. Although the human society on this planet was relatively peaceful, standing here for real, anyone would be afraid. They regretted not requesting for the Imperial Army to escort them. Hui Mao wagged his tail. He hoped that whatever happened would come fiercely. It wasn't easy to come here, so he had to play to his heart's content. As for what the others would do, it wasn't within Hui Mao's scope of consideration. He was a petty person and couldn't care less about so many people. The planetary government was indeed very grand, but like the other buildings in the city, it wasn't very tall. The first time Silen saw the planetary government, he felt that it was like a snapping turtle. It used a hard shell to protect itself, but it also opened its mouth and was ready to attack any incoming prey. There were layers of guards outside the planetary government, but only a small group was sent to pick them up. It was far inferior to the military personnel stationed here. "Silen, there's a big guy inside the planetary government." Hui Mao stared at a certain part of the planetary government with wide eyes. "Is it a sea beast?" Silen asked. "Yes, but that poor sea beast doesn't seem to be in good condition. It's being used for research." Hui Mao had always hated the word research. Back in the League of Stars, a lot of foreign animals were captured for research. That was why Hui Mao couldn't be too casual while he was there. But after coming to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, he felt a lot better. At the very least, the foreign animals here weren't openly captured for research. The animals in AF1 had their rights too. They provided their blood to the RAS for research, but only on a voluntary basis. Not only that, they were also paid handsomely for their blood. Panther the Black Panther was even recruited into Wing. Although Huimao didn't have a high opinion of Panther, who had been defeated by him, Panther, as a member of Wing, would undoubtedly consider things from the perspective of the beasts in the future. He would protect the rights of more beasts and prevent them from being ravaged by some crazy people. This was also the reason why Huimao still had a good impression of Pan Se even though he had defeated him. It was more convincing for the rights and interests of mutated animals to be protected by mutated animals. It seems like the conflict between the humans and the sea monsters here is quite intense, Sillin said. As soon as Sillin's voice fell, a low roar rang out and traveled very far. Deep sea beasts? From the sound of this sea beast, Sillin could tell that it was a species that lived in the deep ocean. It wasn't easy to bring a big guy from the deep sea here alive. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.